Dark mark. When the sky went green and the giant's skull bled light, Sirius and Mr. Weasley sprang to their feet and drew their wands. Sirius hauled Harry and Ron, who had been crouched on the ground picking up scattered gold, up as well. "Stand back, children! Get behind me!" Mr. Weasley shouted, shoving Ginny behind him. "Bill, Charlie, watch your younger siblings." Bill and Charlie had already drawn their wands and moved to their father's side. "Fred, George," Bill called, reaching out to hold the twins back as they craned their necks. "Stay back. Oh, and you too, Scott." Scott didn't move. He stared at the black mist curling in the air. "He's here," he said aloud. "What?" Bill turned toward him. "That black mist." Scott pointed his wand toward it. "Is that? It's him." Sirius's voice was strained. "He's here." Madam Burns strode forward. "Quick, children, back behind the box." Scott glanced toward the VIP box and saw the well-dressed dignitaries inside bolting for the exits. "We probably know who it is," someone muttered. Fred and George grabbed Scott and dragged him a few steps back. Around them, some of the crowd were already fleeing. Most sat stunned. Bagman, who had been host for the match, was now backing away, panicked. "Ludo Bagman!" Madam Burns barked. "Say something. Tell the crowd to leave in an orderly fashion." "Aye," Bagman stammered, flustered under her glare. He raised his wand awkwardly to his throat. "Esteemed audience, due to an incident." His flustered voice carried across the stadium. "The match is canceled. Please leave in an orderly fashion. None of you can leave." Another voice followed, cold and sibilant, each word like a snake sliding across skin. "Apparition is forbidden here," it hissed. "Fiendfire surrounds the entire venue." "What? How can they do that?" "Damn the ministry! Where are the Aurors? What are they doing?" Those trying to escape froze. Scott heard Bill whisper to his father, "Dad, my apparition attempt failed." "Sirius," Mr. Weasley began, but Sirius had already lunged forward, wand raised, ready to attack. "Wait," Scott grabbed him. "I can contact Professor Dumbledore." He fumbled for his mirror, his little emergency communication device, and connected. "Oh, well done, Scott," the twins called out, excited. Scott held his breath until Dumbledore appeared in the mirror, the long beard as reassuring as ever. "What has happened, Scott?" "Professor Dumbledore," Scott said quickly. "The Quidditch final is under attack. It's you-know-who. They have erected an anti-apparition charm across the field and announced the entire stadium is ringed in fiendfire." Dumbledore's face darkened. "I understand." He cut the connection almost immediately. Everyone in the box looked at Scott with sudden admiration. "It seems Professor Dumbledore has already begun to act. Well done, boy," Madam Burns said, delighted. Scott nodded, trying to hide how nervous he was. "I can observe the outside world," he added. He took a stick of wood from his pocket and with a quick transfiguration charm, turned it into a crow. The bird spread its wings and took to the air. Scott tapped the mirror, and the image shifted to the crow's point of view. Ignoring the praise around him, Scott watched the feed intently. The crow flew along the stadium's rim. For a heartbeat, Scott breathed easier. The bird wasn't intercepted. Then the image sent a chill through him. The fiendfire formed an unbroken wall of fire, a ring of living flames around the entire stadium. Outside the wall, Aurors and Death Eaters were fighting viciously. Inside it, Aurors had been driven back and were making a desperate stand at the entrances. Scott recognized several figures. "It's Moody and the others," Mr. Weasley cried. "They're losing ground." The Aurors, led by Alastor Moody, had indeed been forced back toward the stadium by the Death Eaters' spells. "We must help them," Sirius snapped. "We have to clear a path." Voldemort's voice cut through the noise. Everyone turned. He had materialized in full on the far goalpost, his figure terrible and still. The stadium fell hush-dead. The name he gave himself dripped with malice. "Good evening, everyone," he said, spreading his arms. "Perhaps you have all heard of me. I am Lord Voldemort." Compared to the towering goalpost, he seemed small, but the dread he carried made him enormous in everyone's eyes. No one moved to attack. Mr. Weasley held Sirius back and whispered hoarsely, "Don't be impulsive. Sirius, you must protect Harry." Sirius calmed, reluctantly. He stepped forward and planted himself in front of Harry and Hermione. Harry pressed his fingers to his scar, face white and teeth clenched, clearly in pain. Below, Moody had led a team of Aurors out onto the pitch. "Alastor Moody!" Voldemort sneered down at him. "What do you want?" "Tell me, Lord Voldemort," Moody barked. "What do you want?" Voldemort's laugh was light and cruel. That depends on you. If someone hands over Harry Potter, I will spare you. A ripple of whispers ran through the crowd. Harry Potter? Where is he? Sirius grew furious. No one will hand you Harry, he growled, glaring at the box full of nervous faces, especially the dignitaries who had tried to flee. Harry suddenly groaned and clutched his head. Harry! Hermione cried, tears already wet on her face. What's wrong? Damn it! Sirius paced, frantic. No one can decide that for you, Harry. You don't owe them anything. Harry trembled. But, no buts, Madame Burns said firmly. He is an innocent child. We will not hand him over. Moody shouted up at Voldemort, voice echoing. You left your subordinates outside the Fiendfire. That is your mistake. Do you want to fight 100,000 wizards alone, Voldemort? Laughter from Voldemort, cruel and dismissive. 100,000 wizards with just you? Tell me, how many of those 100,000 will be brave enough to attack me? All of them, Moody answered, steady as ever. This is our best chance. We have him isolated. A bright green curse slashed down from the sky. Moody, missing a leg and leaning on his shrewd old vigilance, rolled and avoided it. But a young auror behind him wasn't so lucky. The green streak struck him and he fell, motionless. Raymond, someone cried. The grieving shout echoed across the stadium. Next time you won't be so lucky, Moody, Voldemort said casually, withdrawing his wand. Moody scrambled up. Voldemort swept his gaze over the stands and spoke with the chilling certainty of a killer. Who can guarantee that the next lucky one won't be you? Give me Harry Potter, hand him over, and you may leave unharmed. His red eyes seemed to bore into every person there, smelling blood and radiating menace. The box grew heavier with silence. Some faces showed it. Sirius hissed, baring his teeth. If anyone speaks up, I will kill the traitor before you know who gets to him. I promise you that. Madame Burns scolded him more quietly. Sirius, behave. Sirius did not notice that Harry was watching the fallen auror below, tears tracking down his pale cheeks. Scott leaned against the side of the box, taking everything in, thinking fast. He held the portkey that could get himself, and possibly others, away in an instant. Was it time to use it? If things worsened, he would not hesitate. But for the moment, there was still a chance Dumbledore or the Aurors could turn the tide. Also, Roger and Eddie were not with them. He couldn't leave without considering them. Voldemort's patience frayed. He drifted as black mist through the stands, pointed his wand at a shaking man and demanded, Where is Harry Potter? The man shook his head so hard he was nearly sick. I don't know. I'm Irish. I don't know Potter. Please. Then, die. Green light flashed, and the man was gone. A friend of the dead man leapt up to resist, only to be struck down in an instant. The deaths came swiftly, one after another. A hoarse voice cut through the terror. I'm here. Harry started to speak, as if stepping forward would stop the slaughter. Harry, no! Hermione cried, trying to clamp a hand over his mouth. He shook her off. His voice, when it came, was startlingly calm. He wants to see me. I should step out. If I don't, more innocent people will die because of me. Calm down, Harry. Trust Dumbledore, Sirius pleaded. He'll be here soon. Voldemort swept his attention again through the stands. Tell me, where is Harry Potter? No, Fred blurted, holding the panoramic scope he'd been carrying. He's not here. It's that kid Eddie. Scott's stomach dropped. He snatched the telescope from Fred and peered through it. On the far side of the stadium, in another box, Eddie sat with Roger and Roger's father, Mr. Davis. Eddie's round, plump face made him stand out, and Voldemort had zeroed in on him. The wand was leveled. All of Eddie's flesh trembled slightly under its focus. Scott's teeth ground together. How could Eddie be this unlucky? This is what happens when you don't lose weight, Scott thought in a rush of guilty humor and panic. He couldn't ignore it. He had to do something. But the distance was enormous. Sweat prickled his palms as he tried to calculate a plan. 442. Voldemort retreats. Fiendfire out of control. By the look of you, are you a Hogwarts student? Lord Voldemort asked, eyeing Eddie. Eddie stood frozen, mouth open but unable to speak. Tell me, where is Harry Potter? Voldemort demanded again. He doesn't know, someone replied. Mr. Davis rose to his feet. We don't know the boy's location, he said to Voldemort. Oh, you want to protect this child? Voldemort's wand lifted and fixed on Mr. Davis. Through the panoramic telescope, Scott saw Roger's expression beside Mr. Davis and understood immediately. Roger was about to ambush Voldemort. He didn't hesitate. "Lambo, max speed, caw!" Lambo, perched on the railing, cried out. Dazzling red patterns traced themselves across his dark feathers as he flapped and streaked like a black and red lightning bolt toward the opposite side of the stadium. Roger moved, but Voldemort saw him. Interesting. You wish to resist? Crucio!" A blood-red curse struck Roger. He screamed, collapsing from his seat and curling into himself. Mr. Davis drew his wand and aimed, but a green light had already shot toward him. Scott watched the desperate faces of Mr. Davis and Eddie through the telescope. At that moment, a dark shadow slammed into the green bolt with a muffled thud. Lambo had intercepted the Avada Kedavra. Scott let out a small, relieved breath. Lambo was an animal Scott had created through Transfiguration, reinforced with titanium alloy. The spell couldn't kill it the way it would a soul, and its alloy body made it remarkably resilient. Lambo didn't slow after blocking the curse. He dove straight at Voldemort's face. A silver shield sprang up in front of Voldemort, stopping the raven. "Very good," Voldemort said, tone sharp. "It seems not everyone lacks the courage to resist me." He flicked his wand and hurled Lambo aside, then re-aimed at Mr. Davis. In the private box, Harry suddenly rushed forward, heedless, shouting, "I'm here!" Voldemort turned. Seeing Harry, he abandoned his attack on Mr. Davis, dissolved into black mist, and in an instant was in front of the boy. He materialized on the railing, scarlet eyes boring down at him. Most of the people in the box drew their wands and pointed them at the Dark Lord, but Voldemort didn't spare them a glance. "Harry Potter," he said, speaking each name like a scalpel, "so you were here all along." Harry staggered back 2 steps. His face was pale, but he forced himself to meet Voldemort's gaze. "You came for me, didn't you? Don't hurt innocent people." "Ah!" Voldemort laughed, amused. "Is that what Professor Dumbledore taught you? Hypocritical, ridiculous righteousness." Suddenly, flames flared up and died out. "Tom, I think Harry is a good child, much better than you," said a calm voice. Professor Dumbledore appeared in the box, Phoenix perched on his shoulder. Voldemort's expression shifted. He dissolved into black vapor and surged for Harry. The mist wrapped around the boy and carried him out of the box. "Harry!" several people cried. A rope shot up from the floor and snared Harry's ankle, slowing Voldemort for a heartbeat. Before the black mist could corrode the rope, Dumbledore waved his wand. Like an invisible hand, he plucked Harry from the mist and placed him behind the crowd. The black fog writhed and dispersed, and Voldemort's upper body knifed out of it. "Well done," he said, his gaze locking onto Scott. "The moment you acted, I knew. That rope just now, and that raven that interfered, are yours." Scott sighed. There was no point hiding now. "Yes," he said, "because you aimed your wand at my friend." Voldemort narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing Scott. "Which family are you from? Tell me your name, boy." "The answer will probably disappoint you," Scott said with a faint smile. "My parents are both Muggles." "Impossible," Voldemort recoiled, incredulous. "Are you lying to me, boy?" Dumbledore stepped between them, putting Scott behind him. "Why can't you admit that a wizard's ability has nothing to do with their origin?" Voldemort sneered. "Don't lie in front of me." Dumbledore smiled gently. "Your father also." "Shut up," Voldemort snapped. Rage flickered across his face. "Avada Kedavra!" A deadly green jet shot straight at Dumbledore, but the row of chairs in front of him twisted and transfigured into a gargoyle, blocking the curse like the statues at the entrance to the headmaster's office. At once, the others in the box launched a barrage of spells. Charms of every color hammered toward Voldemort. He sneered, dissolved into black mist, and vanished. Moments later, he reappeared and fired another Avada Kedavra at Harry. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, flew between them and swallowed the green light. The phoenix let out a mournful cry. Struck by the killing curse, he ignited into a ball of flame and fell to the floor, small and scorched, unable to fly. "Damn it! Avada Kedavra!" Sirius shouted and fired his own curse. No one in the box cared about outlawed magic now. Their spells followed the green tumult. Voldemort, pressed back, turned to mist and fled. When he reappeared, he was already high above the stadium. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed through the stands. "Because Professor Dumbledore arrived in time, I was unable to retrieve the boy. Therefore, I must inform you that the fiendfire encircling the stadium is about to go out of control. Enjoy the coming madness." The black mist drifted away, his laughter trailing after it. When Voldemort had gone, Lambo, knocked aside earlier, flew back unharmed and landed on Scott's shoulder. Scott ignored the curious looks and produced his magic mirror, checking the real-time monitoring outside the stadium. The Death Eaters retreated as well, he told the others. In the mirror, with Voldemort's departure, the Death Eaters vanished from their positions. True to his words, the Fiendfire Ring erupted out of control, flames racing outward. Panic spread through the stadium. Screams, shouted orders, people running everywhere, passages clogged with fleeing bodies. "Is there any way to stop it?" Ms. Burns asked, voice tight. "There are 100,000 spectators. The flames are spreading. At this rate, the stadium will collapse." "All of us down there together, cast Finite Incantatem on the ground," Mr. Weasley suggested loudly. "That should break the anti-apparition charm." Everyone approved, but before they could act, Dumbledore shook his head, holding the charred phoenix gently. "I'm afraid not." He looked at Scott. "I checked when I entered. The large anti-apparition charm set up by Voldemort and the Death Eaters is almost as strong as the one at Hogwarts." "We have 100,000 wizards," Bagman protested. "If everyone works together, it would take perfect coordination," Bill interrupted. "The crowd's already in chaos. If everyone doesn't cooperate precisely, the combined effect will be ruined." "What do we do? Are we going to be burned alive?" Ginny cried. "Even Professor Dumbledore's phoenix." "Of course we have other options," Dumbledore said calmly. He turned and fixed Scott with a look. "What do you suggest, Scott?" Scott didn't know why Dumbledore had singled him out, but he answered honestly. "We open a sufficiently wide underground passage. Fast, transfigure it. If it's big enough and ready immediately, people can file down into it and escape." Dumbledore nodded, and the box fell silent. The plan was simple in concept, but difficult in practice. The only realistic way to get 100,000 people safely out quickly was to transfigure a wide, stable passage underground faster than the flames spread. "I'll need your help, Scott," Dumbledore said. "We'll go down together. I will shape the passage. You must make the shaped passage solid. Underground soil may not be firm enough." "Okay, Professor," Scott said. He didn't know whether his magic would hold, but he trusted Dumbledore. Without another word, Dumbledore pulled Scott and leapt over the box railing. He cast a cushioning charm before they landed, ensuring a smooth descent. "Miss," Burns's voice rang out, projecting over the stadium through enchantment, urging calm and explaining the evacuation plan so people moved downstairs in orderly lines. "Albus," Moody limped over. "Good thing you arrived when you did." The old Auror's face was grim. "We've already lost several good men tonight. If you'd been later—" He erupted into complaints, especially about Bagman. "I said, put the next match abroad, Europe, but nobody listens. After tonight, the Dark Lord's terror and our ministry's unreliability will be known everywhere." "Alastor," Dumbledore interrupted. "There will be time for that later. For now, lead the Aurors and organize the evacuation." Moody drew a breath and hurried off to do as asked. Scott watched him go. Whatever had happened tonight had shaken the usually unflappable Auror. Athletes on flying brooms were already helping, carrying children away. Each could carry several youngsters to safety by air. "We're about to begin, Scott," Dumbledore reminded him. Scott nodded. Dumbledore bent low, chanted, and drove the Elder Wand into the turf with a backhanded motion. The ground rumbled. A huge opening yawned in the lawn. Rumble, the opening widened, almost spanning the whole field. As it squared off, a massive passage formed, but it wasn't stable. Sand and soil tumbled in places. "Scott!" Dumbledore called. Kneeling on one knee, Scott thrust his wand into the earth. He didn't have to create the whole tunnel. Dumbledore had shaped it. But Scott needed to solidify the surface layers, turn loose soil into something stable and safe to walk on. As he transformed the soil on the left, right, and top of the passage, he felt his magic being drained with alarming speed, as if a dam had burst. Dumbledore's work continued, conjuring pillars and reinforcing the tunnel's sides, while Scott kept changing the material of the topsoil. Each motion sapped him more. By the time he finished making the passage surface firm, his limbs went heavy, his vision dimmed, and then everything cut to black. When Scott opened his eyes again, the first thing he saw was a bright, old poster tacked to the wall. He was in the burrow, Fred and George's room. "He's awake," someone shouted. "Scott's awake," the twins echoed, practically in his ear. Scott tried to sit up, but had little strength. Fred stepped forward and helped him settle, propping 2 pillows behind his back. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy footsteps came from the stairs, and the little room quickly filled with noise and bodies. "Oh, dear, are you all right?" Mrs. Weasley squeezed in at the bedside, eyes full of relief. "I've heard all about it." She stroked Scott's hair as if he were one of her own. "Thanks to you and Professor Dumbledore, you saved everyone. That's incredible." "It was nothing," Scott managed, forcing a smile. "My body, I'm just exhausted," he admitted when Mrs. Weasley asked. "Then you must be starving," she exclaimed, all practicality and mothering at once. "Move aside. Don't all crowd in here. I need to make something delicious for this dear child." She bustled out, shoving people gently away as she went. Only then did Scott glance around the room. The Weasley siblings, Harry and Hermione, were crowded in. The older brothers, Bill, Charlie, Percy, and Ginny had only poked their heads in to ask a few questions, and satisfied he wasn't badly hurt, had left. Scott turned to Fred, who was nearest the bed. "Do you know how Roger is? Is he all right?" Fred shook his head. "Sorry, I don't. It was chaos when we left. Too many people. We didn't see Roger. Everyone apparated home straight after the stadium emptied." Scott's worry tightened. He was hit with Voldemort's Crucio. I hope he can be strong. Harry, pale and shaken, stepped forward. "Oh, Scott, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry, it's my fault. Those people, them being hurt, it's because of me." His words tumbled out in a rush, fragmented and raw. Scott looked at him, at the haunted fear in Harry's eyes, and said softly, "That's not your fault, Harry." "But," Ron patted Harry's shoulder, "look at it this way, mate. It really wasn't your fault. It's you-know-who being evil. You shouldn't blame yourself." Scott added, "Ron is right." He changed the subject. "Where are Professor Dumbledore and the others? Have the adults gone to deal with the aftermath?" "They left in a hurry," Fred shrugged. "They went off somewhere," George agreed. "I think they went to the Black's house," Harry said. "Sirius lives there, and, oh, Scott, you need to eat to get your strength back." Footsteps and voices sounded, and Mrs. Weasley bustled into the room again, holding a large plate of well-done beef patties and a tall glass of pumpkin juice. Fred set up a small table in front of Scott while Mrs. Weasley fussed, tying part of her apron around his shoulders. "If you don't have the strength, let Fred feed you, and don't be shy. Tell me if it's not enough." Fred grinned mischievously. "Do you want me to feed you then?" Scott adamantly refused. Though his hands trembled, he fed himself, and the food brought a little color back to his face. The others lingered, talking urgently about how Dumbledore and the Ministry should handle the fallout and how the Ministry's credibility could be salvaged. And, inevitably, what would happen to the Quidditch World Cup final that had barely begun? After 3 beef patties and the pumpkin juice, Scott felt his strength returning. He had Fred clear the dishes while the twins divided the remaining patties between themselves, ignoring Ron and Harry's pleading stares. Hermione, frowning, spoke as everyone settled down. "Don't you think you-know-who and the Death Eaters acted strangely today?" she asked. "What do you mean?" Ron said. "I mean, they didn't launch a full attack," Hermione said. "They didn't wait for the moment everyone was most distracted by the Vila. They didn't strike when the crowd was at its peak. They came to make an appearance." Fred stroked his chin. "If you-know-who had just shown up to cause havoc openly," George finished, "and set Fiendfire loose, a lot more people would have been hurt." "Exactly," Hermione said. "It feels like he came to pick targets, not to slaughter. He was there to be seen. He even knew Dumbledore was at the cup, so he must have expected Dumbledore to be able to stop things." "Maybe he didn't expect you to be there," Fred added with a grin towards Scott. "Everyone should thank you, mate." George nodded. "They certainly didn't expect you'd be able to warn Dumbledore and help create an escape route." Scott shook his head. "Maybe that's the point. He was aiming only at Harry." That made Hermione's eyebrows shoot up. "What do you mean?" "Because there were, hundreds of thousands of wizards there," Scott said, looking at Harry. "If his target was only Harry, he didn't try to make everyone fight back." Hermione's face brightened with understanding. "Oh, he was counting on people's hope they'd be left alone, on the bystander effect. If they had attacked everyone, people would have resisted. But by picking victims at random and making it personal, he exploited the crowd's hope that he wouldn't choose them." Ron looked half lost, then suddenly enlightened. Harry's expression flickered, but he quickly hid it. The twins and Scott exchanged a look and stifled nervous smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Even the twins' usual cheeky faces were heavy now. One person had succeeded for a while in holding 100,000 wizards in check. The memory still felt unreal. Why didn't everyone stand up? Harry asked aloud. If 100,000 wands had been aimed at him, even Voldemort would have been scared off. People probably thought, as long as he didn't choose you, you'd be fine, Hermione said. They didn't understand him the way we do. Those foreign visitors don't have the same history with you-know-who, Scott added. And many British wizards have been terrified of the name since they were children. Parents warn their children, Voldemort is evil, cruel, unstoppable, and that fear gets passed on. Fear makes you freeze. That's why only a few had the courage to stand up. He looked at Harry. It was brave what you did. Everyone agreed. Harry, embarrassed by the attention, said, I didn't think I'd done anything special. I was scared, but I couldn't hide and watch people die because of me. Ron grinned and clapped his brother on the back. You did brilliant. Honestly, 100,000 wizards will remember your name. Fred waved away the praise. There were reporters at the cup too. Scott, who helped Dumbledore save everyone, will be famous as well. Scott didn't flush. He remembered Dumbledore's words, magic is the power of belief. Dumbledore had hinted that people should stop fearing Voldemort, that naming him, calling him by his name, was part of breaking his power. It was a strange, almost unscientific thought, but it had a logic that felt deeply true. Maybe that's right, he said quietly. At that moment, Dumbledore walked into the room. Professor Dumbledore, the children chorused with relief. Fred jumped up and made room for him on the bed. Dumbledore smiled, looking like an impish old man caught eavesdropping. Sorry to overhear, he said cheerfully. Scott blinked. He had expected Dumbledore to have been elsewhere. My magic hasn't fully recovered, so I couldn't sense you, Dumbledore admitted in a tone that was both humble and amused. Professor, aren't you busy? Harry asked softly. Dumbledore shook his head. The ministry is much too occupied. I am merely an old headmaster who worries about his students. And now it's summer. I have little official business. He beamed at them. You are all very bright children, especially you, Scott. What you said is something many adults have not grasped. You seem to have seen through the essence of you-know-who. Scott, surprised, asked, Do you agree that he gains power from people's fear? The room fell silent. Hermione covered her mouth. Dumbledore's expression grew grave, and he spoke slowly. You could put it that way. When people are afraid, they lose the will to oppose him. If enough of them stopped fearing him, his power would begin to wane. He sounded almost regretful. Perhaps tonight was the best chance to stop him. If everyone present had found the courage, even to cast a simple stupefy together, Lord Voldemort could have been overwhelmed. After a few more words urging Scott to rest, Dumbledore left as briskly as he'd come. Harry hurried after him, and soon the room was left to mull over what the headmaster had said. A short while later, Harry returned. Dumbledore's gone again, he told them. He was very busy, didn't have much time. Probably came to check on Scott, Ron guessed. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione went out, Fred pulled out his enchanted camera. I filmed some of what happened today, he said. With the footage from Scott's mirror, we could edit the whole thing together. Scott shook his head. No, 100,000 people witnessed it already. It's public knowledge. Putting those images out would do no good. It would only spread fear more, and it could be dangerous. Fred nodded reluctantly. You're right. Maybe only when the Dark Lord is truly defeated could this be shown as history. Scott didn't dwell on it. He had to know about Roger. He tried to call, but the burrow's magic stopped his phone. With Fred and George's help, he made his way outside and finally reached Roger's house. Mrs. Davis answered. Roger was at St. Mungo's, she said, receiving treatment. He'd endured terrible pain, but mercifully was out of mortal danger. Mrs. Davis, distraught, was profoundly grateful to Scott. He comforted her as best he could, and when they hung up, felt a wash of relief for Roger, and for Eddie, who had been protected when things exploded. If Voldemort had targeted Eddie, who knew what would have happened? As Scott turned back toward the burrow, he saw Luna running toward them, breathless. Scott, she called. slipping to a stop in front of him. "We heard what happened at the cup. I asked my father to bring me back. I wanted to find you. Mr. Weasley told father you were here." She looked up at him and without ceremony reached for his hand and took it gently. "That's wonderful. You're all right," she said, then looked at the twins. "I mean, you're all right too, aren't you?" "We're fine, thanks, Luna," Scott said with a smile. Fred and George patted him on the back in a quick, private way. A fit of coughing interrupted them. Scott looked up and saw a peculiar-looking wizard looming behind Luna. His hair was a fluffy, marshmallow white, his hat's tassel drooped over his nose, and his robe was a blindingly bright color. He had a slightly disconcerted face, and his eyes kept darting at the hand Luna held, as he continued to cough. "Hello," Scott said politely. "Luna," the wizard snapped, blinking sharply. He ignored Scott and called Luna's name. "Father?" Luna turned back and looked at the white-haired wizard with a puzzled expression. She didn't seem to notice the two stares that felt like they were searing Scott's hand. In any case, she didn't let go. "Hello, Mr. Lovegood," Scott said politely. "I'm Luna's Ravenclaw classmate, Scott Trollope." "Hello, Mr. Lovegood," Fred and George chimed in casually. "Ahem, hello." Mr. Lovegood inclined his head in a reserved nod. He stepped forward as if to take Luna's wrist, gently pulling her hand away from Scott's and drawing her back 2 steps. Luna blinked, surprised, and looked up at her father. Mr. Lovegood didn't meet her eyes. He stared hard at Scott while holding Luna's hand, an overly polite smile fixed on his face. "My daughter and I were just out looking for crumple-horned snorkax in the wild. Luna was very worried about you and her friends after hearing what happened tonight and rushed back to make sure you were all right." When Mr. Lovegood said "you, her friends," Scott heard the slight grit in his voice. A suppressed snicker came from behind him, Fred and George. Scott stayed composed. "Thanks, Luna," he said, smiling at her, then turned back to her father. "And thank you for your concern, Mr. Lovegood." "You're welcome." "I wasn't worried about you," came 2 simultaneous replies from father and daughter. Luna's smile was sincere. Mr. Lovegood's was beginning to crack. Scott ignored the faltering mask and spoke to Luna in the open. "What happened today was terrifying. You-know-who showed himself, killed people, and was looking for Harry. You were lucky you weren't there." "Is Harry all right?" Luna asked. "He's fine. Dumbledore got there in time." "Is everyone else really all right?" "You-know-who killed some people from Ireland, and Roger was hit with the Cruciatus. Is Roger okay?" "I contacted Mrs. Davis. Roger's getting treatment at St. Mungo's. He should recover." "Oh, should we go see him?" "I'm planning to," Scott said. "Really, I'll go with you then." "Okay." They talked as if no one else were there, with 3 onlookers, and even made plans to visit Roger together at St. Mungo's. Mr. Lovegood's composure finally broke. He coughed, once, twice, a little fit of coughs, and interrupted. "Father, are you ill?" Luna asked, concerned. "Cough, no." Mr. Lovegood loosened his collar. "Father just has a bit of a sore throat." "Oh." Luna nodded and turned back to Scott. "When are you going to see Roger? You don't look well." "Tomorrow, I think," Scott replied. "I'm exhausted. A good night's sleep should cure it." "Okay, then tomorrow." "Luna?" Mr. Lovegood grabbed her hand. "What's the matter, Father?" she asked. Mr. Lovegood smiled with practiced ease. "Who is this Roger you were talking about? Tell Father." "Roger Davies. He's the captain of the Ravenclaw team and a friend of mine and Scott's," Luna answered plainly. Mr. Lovegood shot Scott a dark look, then instantly softened again when he looked back at his daughter. "Oh, you want to visit a friend at St. Mungo's? Of course you can, but you must go with Father." Luna blinked. "But Father, didn't you say you were rushing back to put out an extra edition because of you-know-who?" "No, it's all right." Mr. Lovegood coughed twice. "I can make time to accompany you." "No need, Father. I can go with Scott." Her firmness made Mr. Lovegood's eyes widen. "No, it's too dangerous," he said loudly. "You-know-who and the Death Eaters are watching everyone. You're still young. You can't go alone without an adult." "But Father..." Luna tilted her head up, looking at him. "I think everyone's priority will be protecting St. Mungo's. It won't be dangerous there. Besides, Scott's magic might be stronger than yours." "Impossible," Mr. Lovegood blurted, indignant. "I told you Scott is a true genius," Luna said calmly. "Oh, Luna." Mr. Lovegood clutched his chest theatrically. Fred and George, who had been watching, were already snickering. "Boy," one of them whispered. Mr. Lovegood turned on the laughter, released Luna's hand, stepped in front of her, and fixed Scott with a furious glare. Scott, is it? So you're the one showing off to my daughter? He drew his wand and pointed it at Scott. For a father's dignity, I challenge you to a duel. Scott looked at the melodramatic man evenly. What kind of look is that? The offended father shot back, slyly cross-eyed, mounting his performance. Are you afraid to draw your wand and prove it? He demanded. The air tightened. Even Fred and George fell silent. But Scott, who had regained some of his magic strength, didn't flinch. He could sense Mr. Lovegood's magic, unstable but not wildly powerful, part performance, part genuine outrage. Luna peeked from behind her father, and knowing him well, only smiled apologetically at Scott without stopping the show. Sorry, Mr. Lovegood. Scott remained polite but firm. Because of what happened earlier, I'm exhausted and can't accept your duel. Oh, so if you weren't exhausted, you'd accept? Mr. Lovegood's face settled into an unreadable expression. So you weren't boasting? Scott met his gaze. I've never boasted. Mr. Lovegood's brows knit. Scott smiled at Luna again. You should trust your daughter, Mr. Lovegood. Luna sees the truth clearly. She's wise. I don't think anyone could deceive her. At that, Mr. Lovegood relaxed. That's right, boy. He laughed, sheathing his wand and walking over to ruffle Luna's hair. Luna is certainly excellent. Sorry, Luna. Father underestimated you. It's all right, Luna laughed. This is very interesting. Father and daughter laughed and even spun around holding hands, caught up in their own eccentric bubble. Fred whispered to George, their family's just like that. Luna's madness is from him, George added. After a while, Mr. Lovegood turned back to Scott with a new, reasonable demeanor. I agree. Luna can go with you to St. Mungo's, but you must protect her. Of course I'll look after Luna, Mr. Lovegood, Scott said. Very good. Mr. Lovegood scrutinized Scott for a few more seconds, then nodded. I admire you, boy. You're very calm and polite. He waved his wand as if to punctuate the point. By the way, a bit of advice. If you want to be a greater genius, you should have pure curiosity. You're a bit too calm. Scott was speechless. As editor-in-chief of the Quibbler, Mr. Lovegood could utter contradictions without batting an eye. Thank you for the advice, Scott said with a smile. Very good. Mr. Lovegood clapped his hands with delight. Now, let me interview you. He put away his wand, produced a notepad and pen, and started peppering Scott and the twins with questions about the World Cup final, asking them to recount everything. Scott answered candidly, telling the truth about his actions. Mr. Lovegood scribbled furiously, obviously thrilled. He wasn't worried about exposing anything. Few in the wizarding world took the Quibbler seriously, but he loved the story. Fred and George, however, fed him gold. Their answers were exaggerated, flamboyant, and wildly entertaining, on par with Eddie's tendency to embellish. The three kindred spirits were soon deep in animated conversation, ignoring Scott and Luna. Luna listened with interest and then turned to Scott. I'm more interested in that magic phone you mentioned, she said. You gave the one you made to Dumbledore so he could contact you, didn't you? Scott reached into a small lizard skin pouch and handed Luna a little mirror, the finished magic phone. I had one for you too. Oh, thank you. Luna accepted it with glee. First, channel your magic into it to activate it. Scott showed her how to use it. Luna was delighted, sending messages, experimenting with face-to-face calls, laughing as she tried things out. By the time Mr. Lovegood, finally sated with his interview of the twins, came back to collect Luna, he separated the two and began to lead her home. As they left, he looked back at Scott several times, the warmth of his earlier praise gone. Fred and George collapsed into laughter once the Lovegoods were out of sight. Oh, it's brilliant, Fred laughed. I'm glad Mr. Lovegood finally found his nemesis, George added, someone calm enough to stand against his nonsense, someone who's unafraid to steal his daughter away. He's their worst enemy. They tried to mimic the scene, Luna bluntly besting her father, but their reenactment devolved into roughhousing, arguing over who would play Luna and who would be Dad. Scott watched them roll on the grass, shook his head, and sore and tired, walked back to the burrow alone. The next morning, shortly after Scott woke, Luna came to the Weasley house of her own accord. Hearing they were going to visit Roger, the twins and Harry volunteered to join. The five of them flew to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries in London. The hospital was tense and busy. Healers hurried past exhausted. "Merlin, there are too many patients. I didn't close my eyes all night," one healer muttered. "Mostly crush and trampling injuries. Only one charm injury on our floor." Hearing that, Scott realized the evacuation from the stadium had been far rougher than he'd imagined. After checking at the desk, they went to the 5th floor and found Roger's ward. He lay on the bed, apparently asleep, with Mr. Davis and Eddie keeping watch. "Scott?" Mr. Davis rose as soon as he saw him and took Scott's hand in both of his. "Oh, Scott, I don't know how to thank you. Eddie told me the crow that saved us was yours." "You're too kind, Uncle Davis," Scott said. "How is Roger?" "He's fine." Mr. Davis glanced at the sleeping figure. "The healers say he's recovering. The coma has helped his mind begin to repair." "That's a relief," Scott said. "He did suffer terribly." "It's nothing," Mr. Davis waved it off. "As long as there are no lasting effects, it's a wizard's suffering." Scott introduced the others who had come to visit. Harry stepped forward, full of apologies. "Stop," Mr. Davis said with a tired smile, cutting him off. "I've heard enough apologies." He nodded toward Eddie, who sat silently with his head down. "Go talk some sense into that boy," he told Scott. "I've told him it wasn't his fault, but he won't go home. He's insisting on staying here." Scott had already noticed Eddie's unusual quiet. He went over. "Hey, this isn't like you, Eddie. When did you get so taciturn?" "Scott." Eddie lifted his head slowly. He looked drained, haggard, swollen eyelids, dark circles, and weight lost overnight. "You fellows," Scott put a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to tell me." Eddie seemed steadier than he looked. "I know it wasn't my fault." "If you understand it wasn't your fault, but still feel guilty," that made sense to Scott. He asked gently, "Because you felt so helpless and scared, you think you should have been stronger, and you regret not having worked harder." "You're right," Eddie said, forcing a smile. "I've been too complacent. After this, I see things clearly. If we can't restore peace to the wizarding world, all those money-making plans we dreamed of will never happen." "So you're going to work harder now?" Eddie clenched his fist. "To build my media empire as fast as possible. I have to clear every obstacle in my way." Scott laughed. It seemed this kid didn't need any comforting after all. Since Roger was still unconscious, Scott and the others did not want to linger at St. Mungo's. After the doctors assured them Roger would be all right, they apparated back to the burrow. "I'll walk you home," Scott said to Luna as they climbed out of the fireplace. "Okay," Luna replied, and together they left the burrow, Fred and George's loud teasing following them. "Oh, I don't think Luna needs anyone to take her home in the village she's lived in for over 10 years. No, I think he's trying to make up for that duel with Mr. Lovegood." Scott and Luna ignored them. "Our house is north of the village," Luna said. On the quiet country path, Luna skipped ahead, Scott following with his hands in his pockets. "Have you been in touch with Savannah recently?" he asked. "Of course," Luna said. "We talk a lot." "I want to go back," Scott said, "to the Oak Sea, to the passage the Dohertys guard." Luna stopped and turned. "Oh, you want to explore the passage to Avalon?" "Maybe you don't know yet," Scott said. "Medea has fallen into a deep sleep from Voldemort's curse. If anything is going to be done, now would be the time." "Do you plan to go alone?" Luna's silvery eyes fixed on him. "I don't think that's a good idea." Scott smiled. "Of course I'll contact Savannah first. I wouldn't dare go into Druid territory without her. Ask Savannah first. Even if she agrees, you shouldn't go alone." Luna walked a few steps and looked back. "Have you forgotten? You told me the professors all know about your situation. They're more than willing to help." "Sorry," Scott started, then laughed. "I think I did forget." "It's all right. You're just not used to asking for help." Luna smiled and skipped on. They crossed a wheat field and climbed a small hill. Luna pointed to another, higher rise ahead. "That's my house." Perched on the hilltop was the strangest cottage Scott had ever seen. A squat, cylindrical house painted black, with a pale, fake moon, like a painted disc, suspended behind it against the summer morning sky. The garden around it was gloriously untidy. "Very imaginative," Scott said, eyeing the faux moon. "It's because of my name," Luna said proudly. "My father made that after I was born." They descended and then climbed again. "I'll help you contact Savannah," Luna said. "We should hear from her soon." "I'll tell Professor Flitwick as well," Scott said. They reached the broken gate and paused. 3 hand-painted signs were nailed to it. The Quibbler, editor, X Lovegood, please pick yourself a sprig of mistletoe. Don't touch the dirigible plums. Come on in. Luna pushed the creaking gate open, and a winding path led past all manner of strange plants, growing wild. Scott noticed a bush heavy with orange-red, radish-shaped fruits, the same kind Luna wore as earrings. 2 lush crabapple trees flanked the doorway, their branches hung with large wreaths of mistletoe strung with white beads. A small owl with a slightly flattened hawk-like face perched on a branch and cocked its head at them. Luna waved and led the way to a heavy black door, studded with iron rivets and fitted with an eagle-shaped knocker. "Welcome back, Luna," the knocker spoke, and the door swung open of its own accord. "Come in, Scott." They stepped inside, and Scott's eyes widened. The house was perfectly round, so the kitchen curved with the walls, stove, sink, cupboards all bent to fit. Everywhere was painted in bright primary colors, decorated with flowers, insects, and birds. In the center of the room stood a cast-iron spiral staircase. From above came the cheerful clatter of machinery. "Oh, that's the printing press," Luna explained as she led him up. "Dad's printing the magazine." The second floor was both living room and workshop, even messier than the kitchen. Piles of books and papers covered every surface and flowed across the floor like little islands. Animal models dangled from the ceiling, wings flapping and mouths moving. In the middle of the clutter, Luna's father bent over a huge, rickety wooden machine, gears whirring, belching out copies of the Quibbler. "Dad!" Luna stooped to grab a fresh copy from the floor. "I can't wait to read it." "Luna, you're back?" Mr. Lovegood turned and smiled warmly at his daughter. When he saw Scott, his expression shifted. "Oh, and you, the boy everyone says is a genius." There was an unmistakable edge of disdain in his eyes. Scott stepped forward politely. "Excuse me, Mr. Lovegood, I'm here to take Luna home. I'm Scott Trollope." Mr. Lovegood inclined his head slowly. "I remember your name, boy. I just don't like it." He lifted his chin. "Thank you for bringing Luna, though. You only needed to take her as far as the garden gate, of course." "You're welcome, sir." Scott smiled as if he'd only heard the thank you. He let the barb slide, which seemed to silence Mr. Lovegood's next retort. The older man looked momentarily flummoxed. Scott's imperturbability had unsettled him. "Oh, Dad," Luna said, returning to the present. "You keep working. We have something to do." She took Scott's hand and led him up the spiral staircase. Mr. Lovegood stared after them, his disbelief frozen on his face. Luna's room was small and round with a pale blue carpet. By the bed hung a large photograph of a young Luna curled against a woman who looked a great deal like her. "That's me and Mum," Luna said softly. "She left because of a failed charm experiment." She smiled without sadness. "It's all right. I still have Dad. I always believe we'll meet again." "Of course," Scott said, uneasy. "Let's write a letter." Luna sat at the desk and handed him the copy of the magazine she had brought. "You can read this first." He opened it. The headline read, "Earth-Shattering Changes, the Dark Moment at the World Cup Final." Mr. Lovegood's article rambled in his familiar florid style. Scott recognized kernels of fact from their earlier conversation, but the article had been embroidered, perhaps by Fred and George's embellishments, or by Mr. Lovegood's own eccentric imagination. It suited the Quibbler's tone, and it would be less likely to attract the attention of Voldemort and the Death Eaters than a straightforward report. Scott was reminded, uneasily, that in another telling of events he had read, Mr. Lovegood's open support for Harry had led to Luna's capture. If the magazine drew attention, Luna could be endangered. He looked at Luna as she wrote. He was determined to protect her. "It's written. Take a look." Luna handed him the finished parchment. He read it, nodded, and she folded it, slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and addressed it to Savannah. They went downstairs and sent the letter by owl. "She'll answer soon," Luna said, watching the owl fly off. "She always complains her life is too dull." They stood beneath the crabapple trees talking when Mr. Lovegood stepped out. "Luna, lunch," he said, glancing at Scott. "You haven't gone yet, boy." His look urged Scott to leave, but Luna would have none of it. "You come too, Scott," she said. "You can try our Gertie root infusion." Scott smiled. "I'd be honored." He sat at the table while Mr. Lovegood's glare practically burned him, but he pretended not to notice. The infusion was, as Luna had warned, hard to drink. The rest of the food was less unusual. Scott and Luna chatted and laughed through the meal. Mr. Lovegood stayed sullen and retreated to his workshop as soon as he could. Scott took the silence that meant he had outstayed his welcome as a small victory. "Perhaps I've become Mr. Lovegood's most hated person," Scott said quietly. Luna laughed. "Oh, it's fine. My dad's always like this." Scott felt a pang of sympathy for Xenophilius. Beneath the theatrical exasperation, there seemed to be genuine feeling. After lunch, the owl returned with Savannah's reply. There were 2 letters, one to Luna and one addressed specifically to Scott. He read it, and his plan for the Oak Sea had to be shelved. Savannah's letter was grave. She had not hidden what her grandfather had said. The prophecy hinted at the possible resurrection of Slytherin. If Slytherin were to return, the Doherty family and the druids who had guarded the passage to Avalon for generations would be the first to suffer. Savannah explained that her grandfather had shared part of the truth, and now the druids were split. Some had lost confidence and urged abandoning their ancestral duty, run away and hide. Others, like those who favored Scott's approach, wanted to take the initiative, open the passage, and confront whatever lay within Avalon. At such a tense moment, Savannah warned, it would be wrong for Scott to rush in unilaterally. Scott folded the letter and looked at Luna. The Oak Sea would have to wait. 4:46, deciding to go to the Sea of Oaks. While Scott pondered, Luna finished reading the letter in her hand. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Scott hesitated. He had almost given up the idea of going to the Oak Sea after reading the letter, but part of him still balked. Medea was in a deep slumber. The timing was too perfect to ignore. "I think I need some advice," he said, and prepared to summon Ravenclaw's portrait. "Advice," Luna echoed. Scott caught the change in her face. A mist-like haze drifted into her usually clear silver-gray eyes, giving them a dreamy, mysterious look. "I see," she said in a voice that seemed to come from far away. "Perhaps you should go, but the Oak Sea will not be the end of your journey." Scott was startled, then pleased. "What did you see, Luna?" Luna blinked, and her eyes cleared. "Sorry, I can't see anymore," she said softly. "It's all right, thank you." Scott wasn't overly disappointed. He had grown used to Luna's strange, magical gaze over time. Her so-called magic eyes weren't true prophecy. They were more like an uncanny intuition. Luna couldn't produce specific, excitable predictions like a professional seer, but her impressions were often accurate enough to steer others in the right direction. For Scott, that was more than enough. "Next, I'll ask my mentor," Scott said, taking a blank picture frame from his lizard skin bag and summoning the portrait of Rowena Ravenclaw. "You've missed several days of classes, my apprentice," the portrait admonished as it appeared. "Sorry, esteemed mentor. I think you already know what happened the other day," Scott replied. Ravenclaw nodded. "Indeed I do. Frankly, I don't understand why people insist on holding Quidditch matches at a time like this." "Oh." She noticed Luna. "Hello, little girl." "Hello, esteemed Rowena Ravenclaw," Luna answered. She stared wide-eyed at the portrait. Scott introduced them. "This is Luna Lovegood, also a Ravenclaw student." "Of course." Ravenclaw studied Luna and smiled with obvious approval. "I can tell at a glance she belongs to our house." "It's an honor," Luna said, tilting her head and smiling. Scott explained Luna's unusual talent, the creatures living in her eyes and the way they let her perceive things others could not. "There are little magical things living in my eyes," Luna explained earnestly. "They help me see odd things. We call them rackspurts." Ravenclaw smiled kindly at the explanation. She neither dismissed Luna nor corrected her. She simply accepted it. "It's possible," she said. "No wizard can claim to know the world in its entirety. Congratulations, you are a very fortunate girl. I suspect those little things in your eyes could grow and become even more important." Luna glowed at the praise. "I'll try my best," she said. "I've already found that stronger magic helps them grow." Ravenclaw and Luna took to each other quickly. The portrait's manner with Luna was gentler than with Scott. She asked Luna a few questions and then expressed admiration. Ravenclaw seemed to follow Luna's odd train of thought instinctively, even more smoothly than Scott could, and the two chatted happily. "This child may become an extraordinary witch," Ravenclaw told Scott, "not only because of her talent, but because her way of seeing the world is unlike most people's. It's very interesting." Scott wasn't surprised. He had always thought highly of Luna. He turned the conversation to the current situation with the druids and asked Ravenclaw's advice. "You want to enter Avalon?" Ravenclaw asked when he explained the plan. "If I can disrupt Slytherin's arrangements beforehand," Scott began. "But opening the passage requires the scabbard of the Sword of the Lake," Ravenclaw reminded him. "Salazar closed the passage from inside after entering Avalon with the scabbard. I think the Doherty family of druids will have a way to reopen it," Scott said. He remembered how Slytherin had forced the passage open with the scabbard, despite the druids' objections and the cost in lives that had caused. Ravenclaw agreed. "Then you should go. When prophecy is involved, you must act." Like Luna, she warned Scott not to go alone. "You are young, Scott. Your words may not carry enough weight." Scott admitted the truth of that. Ravenclaw sighed. "Fortunately, times have changed. Since the heir of the Druid priesthood attends Hogwarts now, the school carries some influence with them. In my day, I doubt anyone could have swayed such conservative druids. Even Salazar succeeded only through force." "Perhaps Professor Flitwick would be willing to accompany me," Scott suggested. If Dumbledore intervened, the druids would certainly be more accommodating, but Dumbledore was currently tied up with Lord Voldemort and undoubtedly swamped. After finishing with Ravenclaw, Scott took out his magic mirror and contacted Professor Flitwick. "Scott? Oh, Luna. Hello to you both." Flitwick's cheerful face appeared. "Hello, Professor," Scott and Luna said together. "I heard about what happened last night." "Well done, Scott," Flitwick said with a smile. "You and Professor Dumbledore made the papers. Now everyone knows Ravenclaw counts a genius among its students." "We hadn't seen today's Daily Prophet," Scott said. "We went to St. Mungo's early this morning to visit Roger." "Roger? He was injured?" Flitwick asked, concerned. After Scott explained, the professor understood. "So he was the one you-know-who hit with the Cruciatus? Poor child. It's good he's all right." Scott outlined his thoughts about the Dohertys and the plan to enter Avalon and asked Flitwick for help. "Is that your idea?" Flitwick asked, a little surprised. "Of course I can come with you," Flitwick said after a moment, "but the druids may not heed me." "I want to try," Scott said. "Medea may wake at any time, and now could be the best window." Flitwick agreed. "Then I'll come to find you first thing tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Professor. I'm staying at the Burrow." After ending the call, Scott messaged William, who was undercover in the whole Wizarding Council. William had made little progress yet, but he provided a crucial piece of information. "Only those wizards resurrected with clay bodies know where that lady is," William reported. "They're completely under her control. They would never betray her." "I suspect she planned ahead before falling asleep," William continued. "Right now, the whole Wizarding Council's most urgent task is electing its own Minister for Magic. They've already begun to exert influence. Their preferred candidate is the Secretary General of the Minister's Office, Mr. Greaves." Scott was surprised. Mr. Greaves? But he could see why he might be a viable candidate. The whole Wizarding Council was new, and among ministry personnel, the highest remembered official had been Fudge as minister. With Fudge gone, Greaves, as Secretary General, had become the top-ranking civil servant. Combined with Mrs. Zabini's powerful connections, he might stand a chance. "Medea wouldn't have been targeting Greaves for long, would she?" Scott muttered. "Why do you say that?" Luna asked. "Because Mrs. Zabini married Mr. Greaves under Medea's arrangement," Scott said. "Why him?" Luna wondered. Scott didn't know either. Greaves didn't seem to have anything Medea would value, no powerful family tie to control. Could there be something Scott hadn't discovered yet? He pushed the thought away. There was another possibility, one darker, and Scott had never mentioned it to Milton. What if Milton's mother hadn't really deceived him and run away for love? What if the marriage between Greaves and Mrs. Zabini had been a marriage of convenience, each pursuing their own interests afterward? Or worse, what if Greaves couldn't let go of a previous love, found Milton's mother after she fled, and forced her to stay? It was melodramatic and unsettling. Scott refused to dwell on it. He relayed William's message to Professor Flitwick and to Ravenclaw, then said goodbye to Luna and Mr. Lovegood, and headed to the Burrow. Luna invited him to stay for dinner, but Scott declined to avoid upsetting the fragile Mr. Lovegood. When he refused, Mr. Lovegood visibly exhaled in relief. Back at the Burrow, Scott discovered Hermione had already left. Bill and Charlie had gone back to work too. Harry was still there. Hermione went home, Harry said, but I have to stay. Sirius is too busy to come by. Oh, by the way, he's officially become an Auror. Sirius Black and Auror? Scott was stunned. Given Sirius's rebellious streak, it was hard to imagine him willingly signing up for such a job. No choice. The Ministry is short-staffed right now. Sirius wants to do his part against the darkness, Harry said with helpless pride in his voice. Scott smiled. So you want to be an Auror too? If possible, yes, Harry admitted, a little embarrassed. Mrs. Weasley praised his ambition and used it to chide the twins for their antics, but her scolding had little effect. Oh, did you hear that, George? Mum is still dreaming unrealistic dreams, Fred called. I thought I was hallucinating, George replied. Mum, we've known each other 16 years, long enough to know one another, Fred teased. You're no longer a young girl. You're past the age for dreaming, George added. Their banter sent Mrs. Weasley into a fury. She grabbed a frying pan and chased the twins around the kitchen, and the burrow erupted into familiar chaos. Scott found it entertaining. Fred and George were even more unrestrained than Sirius. They hated being tied down, and Mrs. Weasley's hopes for great things from her sons were probably fanciful. Mrs. Weasley, out of breath and unable to catch them, stood scolding as the twins dodged about. The twins teased Scott, too. He'd appeared in the Daily Prophet for his role with Dumbledore's massive transfiguration, and they couldn't resist ribbing him. Scott finally saw that morning's paper. The front page was devoted to Lord Voldemort. Scott's picture and the story about him and Dumbledore appeared on the second page. Seeing the matrix of magic that had created and stabilized such a vast passage impressed him even more. It had been magnificent from the observer's perspective. Everyone else envied Scott a little for having taken part. Ron's envious look was almost tangible. 447. Conditions for opening the passage. A new day dawned, and Professor Flitwick's arrival shattered the quiet at the burrow. Scott hadn't told anyone else about the prophecy. He only said he had business with Professor Flitwick. Fred and George were curious, but Scott had no intention of burdening them with his troubles. He said his goodbyes, thanked Mrs. Weasley for her hospitality, and departed with Flitwick. Lambeau went with them as well. They apparated to an uninhabited hilltop. So, do you know how to get to the Druid's territory, Scott? Flitwick asked. Or will someone guide us? Scott pulled out the portkey that had taken him to the Oaksea before. After a dizzying spin, they arrived in the subterranean stone chamber he had visited earlier. He cast a lighting charm and found the stone wall he had once destroyed still unrepaired. Not wanting to wander the passages again, Scott used a charm to break open the top of the tunnel, and they surfaced. Is this the Oaksea? Flitwick asked, taking in the endless oak forest. Go find Savannah, Lambeau, and tell her the professor and I are here, Scott instructed. No problem, Lambeau said, spreading his wings and soaring skyward. Let's wait here, Professor, Scott added. It's easy to get lost in these oaks. Last time it took me ages to reach the center. Flitwick nodded. The Druids are a conservative people. I know of them, and once tried to contact them out of curiosity, but they're very exclusive. Ultimately, Druids and wizards aren't so different, Scott said. Both manipulate magic. They just study it in different directions. Flitwick brightened. I've only read snippets, but their magic certainly seems unique. What interests me is their transfiguration, Scott said. Unlike a wizard's animagus form, which is fixed, Druids can transform into different animals. Flitwick's curiosity deepened. Unfortunately, only they know how they do it. They chatted while waiting. Half an hour later, Lambeau returned on a breeze. I've seen Savannah. She'll be here soon. He landed on Scott's shoulder. Scott's magical perception picked up two powerful fluctuations approaching. Pure magic here is almost fused with nature, he said. It's harder to perceive than wizard magic. You can't read a druid's personality from their magic the way you might a wizard's. Footsteps appeared through the leaves. Two gray wolves, one large and one small, slipped through the forest like shadows and halted before them. The smaller wolf elongated and shifted into Savannah, whom Scott hadn't seen in a long time. Long time no see, Scott. Professor Flitwick, she called, dressed in traditional druid garb. Feather and bone ornaments gave her a wilder air. Her cheeks were flushed from running. Welcome to the Oaksea, she added. The larger wolf reshaped into an old man with gray hair and beard, eagle-like eyes and thick eyebrows. His long beard hung in several braids, threaded with beads and strips of cloth. "Hello, I am Patrick Doherty, Savannah's grandfather." He looked Scott over, then greeted Flitwick politely. "Thank you for looking after my granddaughter at Hogwarts, Professor." "Oh, it's my profession, Mr. Doherty," Flitwick replied, visibly moved. "Savannah was a fine student. It's a shame she couldn't complete her studies at Hogwarts." "She has her own path," the old druid said sternly. "Wizardry has its uses." But Flitwick awkwardly tried to protest, but Scott, standing beside him, felt a little helpless. He had asked Flitwick to come as backup, but the professor was gentle and straight-laced. After only a few words, he looked a little out of place. Fortunately, Patrick was not deceitful, merely stubborn, and the atmosphere eased. "Sorry, grandfather's been upset lately," Savannah murmured to Scott. "It's all right. We were the ones who intruded," Scott said politely. "You're still so polite," Savannah pouted a little. "You weren't like that with Luna." "Perhaps because we were intruding, I felt awkward," Scott said with an embarrassed smile. Savannah was about to reply when Patrick's gaze swept over them like a hawk. "Savannah, remember your duties," his tone warned her. Her liveliness drained. "I understand, grandfather," she said. Patrick's eyes shifted to Scott. Scott quickly changed the subject. "How is your brother Aaron?" "Don't worry," Savannah said. "He can't do anything now. His unauthorized actions made me furious. After I became a priestess, I used the power of the saint tree to trap him. No, he'll remain trapped until his spirit and consciousness return to his body." Scott glanced at Patrick, who was talking with Flitwick. "That was the punishment you wanted?" "Yes. We hope he'll reflect on his mistakes," Savannah replied. "Come here, boy," the old man said abruptly, beckoning Scott. Scott approached and greeted him. Patrick did not answer but fixed Scott with that sharp stare. Scott felt the pressure, but did not step back. After a long time, the deep lines of Patrick's face eased, and his eyes softened somewhat. "I must apologize for the trouble that boy Aaron caused you," he said. "We've already accepted Savannah's apology for Aaron," Scott replied. "Since he's been punished, let's consider it settled." Scott needed their help, so it was not the time to dredge up past harm. Patrick nodded. "Your guess is not wrong. We do have a way to open the passage, a method outside the power of the scabbard of the sword in the lake. But opening the passage is a momentous decision. We haven't reached a conclusion." "So which way do you lean?" Scott asked. Although old, Patrick's eyes sharpened with resolve. This old man would not flee without a fight. It seemed the older generation's priest favored taking action. Scott felt a spark of hope. However, Patrick raised a hand to stop Scott's eager reply. "I must tell you, opening the passage is not easy. Even if we know how, we lack some necessary conditions." "Please tell me," Scott urged. Patrick's brow furrowed. "Perhaps Savannah already told you." He shot a stern glance at his granddaughter, and she lowered her head. "Opening the passage needs the full power of the Saint Tree," Patrick said. "Unfortunately, Slytherin once stripped the Saint Tree's bark to record history seen by the thousand-mile eyes. That grievously wounded the tree. But 1,000 years have passed," Scott protested. "Can the Saint Tree still not recover after so long?" Patrick's face darkened. "Through generations of effort, the tree almost recovered until that boy Aaron interfered." He inhaled heavily. In short, he destroyed the crucial step toward the tree's full restoration. Because of his deed, the Saint Tree has never reached completion. Scott's disappointment was immediate. "Aaron once told me he needed 3 years. He's a little over 2 years away from returning to his body. Does that mean we have to wait more than 2 years before you can open the passage?" By then, Scott would have graduated, likely too late. Medea might awaken any time. Slytherin's revival could come at any moment. Time was not on their side. "No," Patrick said, shaking his head. "It will be longer than that. Even if Aaron leaves the Saint Tree's protection, it will take us considerable time to restore the tree's full power." "How long?" Flitwick asked. "Half a year at least," Patrick said. "Even if we drain the power of other oaks across the Oak Sea to feed the Saint Tree, it will take at least 6 months. Flitwick shook his head. "We can't wait that long. Miss Slytherin lies under you-know-who's curse. The window before she breaks the curse is our best opportunity." Savannah spoke up. "We do have a faster way, grandfather." He glanced at her, then at Scott. Yes, there is a quicker method, but it's full of unknowns and deadly dangers. Tell me, Scott said calmly. He had to hear it. Find the lost Saint Tree heart, Patrick replied. Scott was stunned. The Saint Tree had not only lost bark, but a heart? He must have looked incredulous, because Patrick's tone turned sharp. The Saint Tree heart is the crystallization of the Saint Tree's power. It grows slowly, but it's a renewable resource. If it's renewable, why don't you have one now? Scott's expression must have asked the question aloud. Patrick grew more annoyed. Because that damned Slytherin grievously wounded the tree, and it has not recovered. Scott absorbed that and asked plainly, "Where is this lost Saint Tree heart?" Patrick sighed. "Have you heard the legend of the Silent Land and the tower extending to the Earth's core? It was a tale told 1,000 years ago." Scott cut in, reciting the old rhyme from memory. Silent Land, tower extending to the Earth's core. 7 set out, 1 returned. 1 died in fire, 1 in deep water, 1 at the treetop, 1 at the base of the tower, 1 from falling rocks, 1 from earth collapse. 6 perished from the curse, and the one who escaped never escaped the shadow of death for the rest of his life. Patrick stared at him, surprised. "I didn't expect any wizard still to remember that legend." "It's a coincidence," Scott replied. He produced a wooden box from his deformation lizard skin bag and took out an animal skin inscribed in ancient runes. "I happened to get this." He unfolded the skin as the others leaned in. To accommodate Flitwick, Scott crouched. Flitwick scanned the runes and recognized them quickly. Is it the Stennis Standing Stones on Melanesian Island?" "It's true," Patrick confirmed. "A druid of the Doherty family was one of those 7. He died during that excavation, and the treasure he carried, the Saint Tree heart, was left there." Flitwick looked grim. "If that's so, the place is extremely dangerous. I cannot let my student risk going there." Patrick's eyes met Scott's. "If you want to open the passage early, this is the only way." Scott listened in silence to the old druid's steady words, a cold knot of unease tightening in his gut. The coincidences kept piling up, the beast hide he'd gotten over the summer, the ancient adventure tale passed down for 1,000 years, and now a way to use it. Could it all really be luck? The druid glanced at him. "What are you afraid, boy?" Scott looked up. The druid's face was weathered and unyielding. "It's natural to be afraid," he said. "For 1,000 years, we druids never even thought of going in to retrieve the Saint Tree heart." Savannah, standing nearby, frowned. "We might only be able to wait until Aaron comes out of the Saint Tree's protection. What if it's too late?" "That depends on fortune," the druid replied coldly. "If Slytherin breaks through the Holy Land before Aaron recovers, Aaron will lose any chance of regaining himself, but he brought this on himself." "How could that be?" Savannah's eyes widened. "Slytherin will smash open the passage. That will damage the Saint Tree even more, and anyone sheltered by the tree, Aaron included, won't be able to avoid it." Savannah glanced at Scott, then at her grandfather. "I want to go. I can be responsible for retrieving the Saint Tree heart." The old man shook his head. "You want to save your brother and protect this boy," he said, glaring at Scott. "But I cannot allow it. You are the new priest. You have duties to your people." Savannah tried to argue, but he waved her off. "Give it up. You cannot guarantee you'll come back safely." He turned back to Scott. "I have told you everything I will. The decision is yours. Until you decide, do not come to Oaksea again." He made a dismissive gesture toward the door. Savannah, displeased, said, "Grandfather." The druid's heavy eyelids drooped. "Savannah, my granddaughter, you must understand. The moment you became a priest, you gave up any right to marry an outsider." Savannah's face flamed crimson. No. What are you talking about, grandfather?" "You know what it means," he said frostily. The tension between grandfather and granddaughter left Scott awkward. He bowed politely. "Thank you for your counsel, Mr. Doherty. I will think carefully." "Ahem. Let us go." Professor Flitwick put out his hand and Scott took it. "Goodbye, Mr. Doherty," Scott added, then to Savannah, "and thank you for your help." Lambeau fluttered up and landed on Professor Flitwick's shoulder. The druid chimed in one last time. "I forgot to tell you, no apparition or magical flying here." Scott handed the silver, snake-shaped necklace that served as his portkey to Professor Flitwick, so Flitwick and Lambeau could touch it. The charm activated, and in an instant they were no longer at Oaksea in Ireland, but in the forested edge of the Scottish Highlands. Professor Flitwick looked up at a noisy congregation of crows with delight. "Oh my, what a sight! This is just outside the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts," Scott explained, stroking Lambo, who was perched contentedly on Flitwick's shoulder. "Lambo has become the king of the crows here, so they follow him." "That's remarkable," Flitwick said, smiling. Scott enlarged Lambo enough for it to carry them both back to Hogwarts. They went to Flitwick's office, sat on the sofa, and talked over tea. Scott produced the blank picture frame and summoned the Ravenclaw portrait to tell it what had happened that day. He explained they hadn't met anyone else from the Doherty family, only Mr. Doherty himself. For his part, Professor Flitwick was philosophical. "For druids, secrecy is normal. At least Mr. Doherty, who holds the highest position in his family, was willing to speak with us. It's unfortunate, but not surprising." The portrait shook her head. "The tower extending to the Earth's core? I've only heard legends about it," she said. "I never thought much of them." "My advice is not to take the risk, Scott," Professor Flitwick added. Scott remembered Luna's voice. "You should indeed go, but Oaksea is not the end of your journey." Maybe he would try the tower someday. "Don't forget," the Ravenclaw portrait said, "the beast hide mentioned you must enter that cursed tower on the longest day of the year." "The longest day is June 21st, Flitwick said. "You'd have to wait until next summer." The verse mentioned islands of the far north, the longest day where the standing stone's shadow points, Scott recited. He'd never thought much about it before. A standing stone's shadow moves all day. What does that line mean exactly? If there's no other instruction, it probably means the shadow at sunrise, the portrait said. Scott frowned. "I thought it might not require that exact day exactly. One could calculate the shadow's direction for that day." "If the date is emphasized," the portrait replied, "the entrance to that cursed tower appears only on that day. Of course, you can try to find it another way." Professor Flitwick brightened. "I can accompany you." So after lunch, the two apparated to the Orkney Islands and spent the afternoon searching around the standing stones of Stennis. They widened their search to a 5-kilometer radius, including the Stennis Loch, Harry Loch, and the nearby Broad Cairn Stone Circle. Even with Scott using magic to sense the land, they found nothing. Standing beneath the wind-carved megaliths, Scott could only agree with the portrait's assessment. There was no sign of the tower. "Don't be discouraged, child," Flitwick said, patting his arm. "Remember the prophecy promises your victory. Stay optimistic." Scott breathed and forced himself to relax. He wasn't ready to head back to Hogwarts yet and persuaded Flitwick to take him to London. They went to St. Mungo's to visit Roger. By then, Roger was awake, though still a little weak. "Oh, Scott, Professor," Roger said, brightening. "We're about to be discharged," Roger's father, Mr. Davis, said. After Flitwick offered his polite concern and left, the Davises invited Scott to stay at their house. "We'd be happy to have you," Mr. Davis said. "Roger's mother has wanted to meet you for a while." Their welcome was warm. That evening, Roger was exhausted and went to bed early. Scott stayed in the guest room and, unable to sleep, spent the night organizing his magic. He began with charms. His skill with charms wasn't exceptional. He had learned many, but lacked a signature spell. In combat, he relied more on Transfiguration. He divided his ideal Transfiguration into 4 stages and was confident he was in the 3rd now. He could smoothly combine Transfiguration with rune circuits and charm effects, producing layered magic on the fly. Under the Ravenclaw portrait's teaching, he had learned many rune circuits, but he'd never properly organized them into reliable combat techniques. He decided early on to follow the summoner path. His only constant companion so far was Lambo. Other summoned creatures were transfigured and then dispelled. Maybe he should design more stable summoned creatures, ones with roles and memory, like Lambo. He sat up, took out his notebook and fountain pen, and began to sketch. First came the Fire Raven, something he'd used before and wanted to keep. To avoid constantly recreating them, he gave them a sleep function. When not needed, they would fall into a deep, inert sleep, no longer producing flame and appearing almost like inanimate statues. He'd also give them limited memories and ranks. Only one, the cleverest, would be a leader. The rest would be obedient drones, with the leader directing them like Lambo commanding a flock. He named the Raven leader Edgar Allan Poe. He couldn't yet craft something as sophisticated as Lambo with his current magic. He planned to attempt the full creation after drinking a potion to boost his power. After an hour, he finished the fire class design and moved on to water. He reviewed the water rune circuits he knew and thought two could combine well. One he labeled Water Prison and the other Water Blade for clarity. The original names didn't matter as much as making them memorable. If he could fuse Water Prison's control with Water Blade's offense, he'd have a summoned creature that could attack, defend, and restrain. The next morning, he woke near noon. He'd never slept so late and felt sheepish. Only Roger was downstairs. "What were you doing last night?" Roger asked. "My dad said the guest room light was still on at 3 this morning." Scott showed him the notebook. The dense pages of ancient runes made Roger's eyes glaze over. "Take it away," he said. "They make me dizzy." "You'd be in Hufflepuff," Scott teased. "Hey, I was joking," Roger protested. Scott laughed. "You're not lacking in intelligence. You're just not the obsessive type, not in the way Ravenclaws stereotypically are." "Not obsessed with Quidditch?" Roger asked. "Everyone likes Quidditch," Scott replied. "You're not obsessed enough to make it your future." Roger admitted it with a grin. "Anyway, I'm still a Ravenclaw. No one said you weren't." Scott showed Roger his designs and asked for ideas. "So far, 2 types decided," he said. "This is like designing a video game," Roger said, fascinated. "Why are they all animals? If it were me, I'd design a beautiful girl to fight alongside me." "You can't transfigure actual humans," Scott said. "Pity," Roger tutted. "Still nice designs." Scott spent the last days of summer at the Davises. Eddie came by often when he found out Scott was staying. 3 days before term began, Milton returned to Britain, and they went to Diagon Alley together to buy new textbooks. On September 1st, the new school year began. 449. News about the Triwizard Tournament. On the train to Hogwarts, Scott returned to the compartment where his roommates were waiting after his perfunctory prefect patrol. "What were you guys just talking about?" he asked, collapsing into the empty seat by Milton. "We were talking about our summers," Milton said. "I thought we'd already covered that." Scott grinned and patted Milton on the shoulder. "Do I need to welcome you back to Hogwarts again instead of dropping out?" "It's all this kid Eddie's fault," Roger said with a bored yawn. "He's told the story of his summer in America like 5 different ways already." Milton laughed. "Just treat it as entertainment." "Hey," Eddie snapped, annoyed. Roger ignored him. "I'm still kicking myself for missing the World Cup final." He sounded hollow, as if nothing could lift him. 3 days earlier, the disrupted Quidditch World Cup final had been rescheduled and held in Iceland. Because of the rushed decision and the prior chaos, few spectators had attended. The match had been played on a makeshift pitch in the wilderness. Bulgaria's seeker had caught the golden snitch, and Ireland won the cup. "You should feel worse for the players and for Bulgaria's seeker," Scott said to Roger. "That was their moment of glory. There weren't many people there to cheer for them." Eddie shrugged. "At least they made the front page, especially Victor Krum. I heard he's an ungraduated student at Durmstrang, and now everyone's calling him a Quidditch star." They kept their conversation safely light, but the compartment door opened suddenly, and the clingy couple, Dylan and Kayla, drifted in. "Oh, Scott, you're always slacking," Kayla complained loudly. "Professor Flitwick should have made Dylan the male prefect from the start. Oh, by the way," she turned to Milton. "Congratulations, Milton. I hear your father might become the new Minister for Magic." The air in the compartment changed instantly. Scott and the others exchanged careful looks. "Oh, thank you, Kayla," Milton said with difficulty. "But that's nothing to congratulate me on." Ignore her," Dylan muttered, awkwardly tugging Kayla to move on. "What's wrong?" Kayla murmured as he dragged her away. Scott patted Milton's shoulder. Roger and Eddie watched him with concern. "I'm fine," Milton said. His eyes were red, but he hadn't cried. "This is why I had to come back. I know I can't keep running away. I'll deal with it." His resolve seemed firmer than before, and the others felt relief. "You don't have to avoid me," Milton added seriously. "Those are things I'm going to face." Scott nodded. "From what I know, Medea hasn't awakened yet. With what she's already done, it won't be easy for Mr. Greaves to seize power." Roger agreed. I actually favor Miss Burns. She's supported by Dumbledore. As head of the legal enforcement squad, she's well placed to get people on her side. Eddie suggested, you could try contacting Mr. Greaves secretly, find out what he really wants. Since Milton wanted to confront the issue, his friends stopped skirting it and began helping him strategize. In the end, they decided he would try to contact Mr. Greaves privately, with Scott's help. As dusk fell, they reached Hogsmeade Station. A sudden storm rolled in, strong wind and heavy rain, and they dashed for the Thestral-drawn carriages. Luna appeared, and Scott pulled her up beside them. "They're back," Luna said with delight, smoothing wet hair and staring at the Thestrals. Then her gaze found Milton. "Oh, Milton." She reached behind her ear for her wand. "Do you want me to dispel the Sorrow Meng for you? They're clustered quite densely in your head." "What?" Milton blinked, surprised at Luna's matter-of-fact seriousness. "You can try it, Milton," Scott encouraged with a smile. Milton hesitated, then agreed. Luna nodded decisively and waved her wand. "Brain to mush!" A flash of white light, and Milton's expression went vacant. "That should keep the Sorrow Meng from surviving in his head," Luna said, calm as ever. Roger and Eddie stared, stunned. "Becoming a fool certainly means no worries," Eddie muttered. "You're a genius," Roger told Luna, giving her a thumbs up. Luna inclined her head and flicked her wand again. "Finite in Tatum." A warm golden glow swept Milton's face. The dullness cleared, his eyes shone again. "What happened?" he asked, looking bewildered at the passing countryside, as if he'd missed part of the trip. "See?" Luna said, satisfied, tucking her wand behind her ear. "He looks much better." Roger, Eddie, and Milton himself couldn't help laughing. For a moment, the tension broke completely. The carriage passed between winged boar sculptures and pulled up at the stone steps to the oak doors. A lightning bolt streaked across the sky as the crowd climbed the steps and poured into the great hall. Scott stopped his friends at the entrance. Suddenly, Peeves launched an attack, pelting students with balloons full of water. Chaos erupted as drenched first-years screamed. Professor McGonagall shouted until she invoked Dumbledore's name. Only then did the poltergeist retreat, still scoffing. They entered to find Dumbledore and several professors already at the staff table. McGonagall and Hagrid were out with the new students, Lupin was absent, and Snape, rumored to have become a Death Eater, was not present. "Those snakes have lost their king," Eddie whispered, enjoying the schadenfreude. Most of the Slytherins sat stiffly, guarded and expressionless. Professor McGonagall led a line of curious first-years into the hall. Dumbledore rose. "Before the sorting begins, I should like to introduce 2 new professors." The room fell silent. First, Professor Alastair Moody, who will be teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts. "Professor Moody!" Wood clacked on stone as Moody limped in on a wooden cane and a wooden prosthetic leg. His face was a map of scars. His magical eye rotated constantly. The new students paled. Dumbledore praised him as a veteran Auror who had fought dark wizards for decades. "Let us welcome him." Polite applause followed, scattered and nervous. Many students were intimidated by his fierce presence. Moody didn't seem to care whether they liked him. His magical eye swept the hall, taking everything in. "Too lax," he rumbled as Dumbledore gestured him to his seat. "Everyone's too lax. Those dark wizards and their lord are out there plotting to conquer us. They even caused a ruckus at the World Cup finals." The hall froze. Moody continued, voice loud. "I will teach you to fight those cunning dark wizards, and, more importantly, to stay vigilant." His eye fixed on the Slytherin table. "And those hidden little brats with dark intentions, don't think you can pass me unnoticed." Slytherin faces went furious, but none dared answer. Dumbledore acknowledged Moody dryly and called the hall to order. A smattering of Gryffindors, led by Fred and George, clapped. Moody inclined his head, then caught Scott's eye and bared a frightening, toothy smile. Scott returned a polite nod. Dumbledore beamed. "Next, we welcome Horace Slughorn, who returns to Hogwarts after many years." At that, Slytherin erupted into cheers. Professor Slughorn appeared, neatly dressed, balding and portly, with protruding eyes and a thick, walrus-like silver beard. He waved, smiling broadly. Dumbledore called him one of Hogwarts' most accomplished potions masters and the most popular head of Slytherin. Slughorn puffed up with pride. "I am delighted to return after more than 10 years to resume my favorite work," he said. "I can't wait to meet you all. I expect many of you will receive an invitation to the club I'm forming." He went on to explain the Slug Club. He collected the talented, the famous, and the well-born, those he considered worth knowing. Though his phrasing was careful, the meaning was clear and irked some professors and students. The Slytherins, by contrast, swelled with pride. "He doesn't care just about bloodlines," Eddie whispered. "He likes elites, geniuses, and celebrities. Scott, you'll definitely get an invite to his club." Scott suspected as much. After all, he'd come to be seen as both talented and famous, the exact type Slughorn coveted. The Sorting Hat began its yearly song. "That was over 1,000 years ago. I was just woven into form." There were 4 famous wizards. Their names live on to this day. "All right, put me on properly. I've never been wrong. I'll look into your mind and decide which house you belong to." When the song ended, McGonagall took the floor, and the sorting ceremony proceeded with applause and the proud cheers of house tables. After the last new student had found a place, Dumbledore rose once more. "Although I know everyone is hungry," he began, "I have one most important announcement. The Triwizard Tournament, that ancient competition, has been revived," he declared. Voices rose in disbelief and excitement. "Are you kidding? At Hogwarts? Is this true?" Dumbledore went on. "Originally, the tournament was to be held here at Hogwarts, but for well-known reasons, it was decided that the hosting rights will be given to Beauxbaton's Academy." The hall groaned and erupted in curses. "No, we've lost it." Hands flew to mouths, and students muttered wildly. Many blamed recent dark events without naming names. The Slytherins, whose parents were Death Eaters, caught withering looks. "Quiet, please." Dumbledore raised his hands until he got the room under control. "Although we will not host the tournament, we will select a number of outstanding students to be candidates to represent Hogwarts at Beauxbaton's and compete for the cup. Sign me up." Fred and George leapt to their feet, bouncing. Eddie turned toward Scott, eyes bright. "Oh, Scott, you have to enter. Represent Ravenclaw." "Hold on," Dumbledore said with a chuckle. "There will be a series of procedures to select the representatives who meet the requirements. We will announce the list in mid-October. The chosen students will depart for Beauxbaton's on the last day of October." "What are the requirements? Tell us." "One condition," Dumbledore said. "We believe the chosen champion must be at least 17 years old." A collective groan swept the hall. "That's not fair," protests broke out, especially from Ravenclaw when it became clear Scott wasn't yet 17. 450. Methods for selecting student representatives. Despite the uproar, Dumbledore only smiled. "Silence!" Professor McGonagall straightened and tapped her goblet with her wand. "Silence!" At the same time, the newly appointed Professor Moody sneered, and his blue magical eye spun a few times. The great hall fell instantly silent. "What's going on?" Someone nearby whispered in confusion. To everyone else, Moody was merely seated at the staff table, but he gave off a palpable sense of pressure. Only Scott noticed the change in the magical fluctuations around him, an applied magic technique intended to intimidate. It probably only affected those weaker than the caster, but the idea sparked something in Scott. He pulled out his notebook and jotted down the inspiration at once. Roger muttered, a little annoyed, "Hey, we're all sweating for you, and you're just calm as ever." "There's no use being anxious," Scott said with a smile, closing his notebook. "Let's hear what Dumbledore has to say." "Champions representing the 3 schools in the Triwizard Tournament must be at least 17 years old," Dumbledore announced. "This is a rule set by ministry officials from several countries." Eddie mumbled under his breath. "I hope there's a but coming." "But," Dumbledore's pause made everyone sit up straight. "Our chosen Hogwarts student representatives will not be limited by the age stipulated in that rule," he continued with a smile. "In addition to the official champion candidates, we will select some students of other ages as representatives to visit Beauxbaton's and interact with students from the other 2 schools." He clapped once. "How will they be chosen?" "Hogwarts will select 25 students to form the delegation to Beauxbaton's. To gain a spot, you must obtain recommendation letters from the professors." He went on to explain the procedure. "You must obtain recommendation letters from at least 5 professors and hand them to Professor McGonagall. The first 25 students to receive the required recommendations will be the Hogwarts delegation for this event. At once, the students turned their eyes to the faculty table. The older students bristled with eager energy. The younger ones, who knew they had little chance against older applicants, exchanged disappointed looks. Oh, 5 recommendation letters. Eddie clenched his fist, excitement written all over his face. Scott's got this, and maybe I even stand a chance of seeing Bobaton. Quiet! McGonagall rapped her goblet again. This concerns the honor of Hogwarts, and we will be strict. Her gaze swept the hall. We will consider not only your knowledge and character, but your manners as well. At her words, many students suddenly sat up straighter and put on proper smiles. A few rolled their eyes so subtly it was almost invisible. Don't worry, children, Professor Flitwick chimed in. We will have plenty of time to observe you. We have already discussed it, Professor Sprout added. We will not sign recommendation letters before October. Professor Slughorn chuckled. Only the most outstanding students in our eyes will earn the honor of representing Hogwarts. All right, Dumbledore clapped again. That is enough explanation. Now enjoy your dinner. At once the long tables filled with tempting dishes. Everyone was hungry. For the moment, food was all that mattered. Some students, remembering McGonagall's admonition, deliberately displayed impeccable table manners, a stark contrast to the ravenous hordes around them. Scott ate naturally, a bit faster than usual. Roger and Milton did the same. Oh, you lot are devious, Eddie said, slow to adopt the manners. He wiped his greasy mouth with a napkin, put down a huge chicken leg, and picked up a knife and fork. He glanced around, then said to the others, I think Fred and George have thrown in the towel. Scott looked over and found Fred and George not reining themselves in at all. If anything, they were getting worse, gorging like 2 bandits. Ginny, sitting next to them, shot disgusted looks their way. When she caught Scott looking, the twins winked and bounded over, each still clutching a chicken leg. You given up already? Scott asked, amused. That's not our style. Fred nodded around a mouthful. You know, nothing can make us proper children. We figured even a disguise for 2 months would kill us, George said with an exaggerated grimace. But we won't miss the tournament, will we? Fred winked. That's up to you, brother. George reached out a greasy hand to pat Scott on the shoulder. Scott dodged. If I get picked for the delegation, you can live stream it from Hogwarts. Brilliant. We'll make it happen. They high-fived and scampered off. Eddie groaned in disappointment. Blast! They beat me to it. A few days earlier, Scott's roommates had seen the remote live streaming device he'd made and received the magic phones he'd gifted them. Aren't you trying to get on the delegation too? Milton asked Eddie. Eddie looked at him for a long moment, then confessed, that was mostly boasting. After dinner, Eddie, now a 5th-year prefect, and his partner went to welcome the new students. Scott and his friends returned to the common room to fill out their advanced course application forms. As 6th years, they were about to face a very different curriculum. The professors called it advanced work. Each professor had standards for admission. They had to pick their subjects now, and the professors would decide whom to accept based on past grades. Although Scott had earned 10 OWL passes, he didn't plan to pursue advanced classes in every subject. I want to focus on the ones I'm good at, he told Roger and Milton. I'll go for Transfiguration, Charms, Potions, Defense Against the Dark Arts, Ancient Runes, and Arithmancy. I'll drop History of Magic, Astronomy, and Care of Magical Creatures, and Herbology, too. He only wanted enough proficiency in potions to follow existing recipes. He wasn't interested in innovating, so giving up herbology was acceptable. Roger opted for Transfiguration, Charms, Defense Against the Dark Arts, Astronomy, and Care of Magical Creatures. Milton chose Charms, Potions, Defense Against the Dark Arts, Herbology, and History of Magic. The next day, all 3 of their course selections were approved. With the start of the new term and the Triwizard Tournament looming, Hogwarts' atmosphere changed noticeably. Fewer pranksters were about, while far more students tried to impress professors and behave with refined airs. Everyone adapted to the styles of the 2 new teachers in time. Unlike the original story, the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor was the real Alastor Moody. His teaching style was naturally different from the cruel, theatrical Moody impersonated by Barty Crouch Jr. He didn't demonstrate the unforgivable curses for shock value, but his Auror experience was considerable, and he shared useful, practical knowledge from it. His dueling classes proved especially beneficial to Scott. Though Moody walked with a cane and limped, his dueling skills outclassed most, Sirius and Lupin included. Professor Flitwick admitted to Scott, "I'm no stranger to life-and-death situations, but Alastor's experience surpasses mine." Moody's flaw was his relentless vigilance. He was always suspicious, especially of descendants of Death Eaters, who felt the brunt of his scrutiny. Because of the 2 incidents over the summer, Scott had also been on his list of suspects. Scott didn't act defensive. He attended classes attentively and absorbed the lessons. Over time, Moody's suspicion seemed to ease, though Scott never let his guard down. He never intended to conduct covert operations at Hogwarts anyway. Professor Slughorn, by contrast, was instantly popular. Easier to get along with than Snape had been, Slughorn made potion class pleasant again. Milton no longer blundered nervously. Slughorn loved to fawn over celebrities and to recruit talented students into his famous Slug Club. He noticed exceptional students and favored them, but he also tended to overlook the mediocre. He was warm to Scott and invited him to his office several times, but he misremembered Milton's name until he learned that Milton's father, Mr. Greaves, was campaigning to be Minister for Magic. Once Slughorn knew that, Milton suddenly became the object of the professor's attention and felt awkward about it. After one potions lesson, Slughorn chatted cordially with Milton about his father. Walking back, Milton said to Scott, "If Slughorn favored me because of my own talent, I'd be proud, but it's because of my dad, and that just makes me uneasy." Scott tried to reassure him. "This isn't bad. Use it to get into Slughorn's circle, make connections. It could be useful." Milton frowned but agreed. "I don't like it, but I suppose I should work hard." That evening in the dormitory, Scott handed Milton a pair of small mirrors. "They're ready. These are special magic phones, like a 2-way mirror. Communication is limited to the 2 mirrors, but you can exchange messages." "Thank you." Milton tested the device gratefully, then said, "I'll give one to my father." "I think you should be careful," Scott warned. "Lots of people are watching him right now." "So I can't send it by owl." Milton looked worried. "I'll handle it." Scott took responsibility. Only Lambeau can get this to him perfectly. The next morning, Lambeau delivered a mirror and a letter. He reported later, "Mr. Greaves hardly has a moment alone. I gave him the item when he went to the restroom." That afternoon, Milton received a message from his father. "Do not act rashly. Remember that." Milton tried to reply, but Mr. Greaves didn't answer again. "Has he been compromised?" Milton gripped the mirror. Scott's face was serious. "It's possible. What will you do?" Milton took a deep breath. "For now, I'll follow his instructions. He knows his situation best. Any rash move might make things worse." Scott patted his shoulder. "Mr. Greaves will be all right for now. Remember, the minister hasn't been chosen yet, and I still have that lead from William." When Scott called William back, he sent the message in front of Milton. "How likely do you think Mr. Greaves is to be elected minister?" William's reply came almost immediately. "In my opinion, less than 30%. Since you know whose public reappearance and the incident where you and Dumbledore saved so many people together, most wizards trust Dumbledore more than ever. Dumbledore has publicly said many times that he supports Ms. Burns for minister. The whole Wizarding Council is trying to seize public opinion to swing votes, but I don't think they'll succeed. Of course, that's just my personal opinion. We'll see the real results when the new minister takes office at the end of the month." "Seize public opinion?" Milton, who'd seen the message, frowned. "In the British magical world, who can compete with Headmaster Dumbledore's prestige?" Scott gave him a look. "Still too naive, Milton." "What's wrong?" Milton asked. Scott shrugged and was about to explain when Eddie leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. "Politics is the dirtiest business," he said, putting on an air of worldly wisdom. "You wouldn't understand. You haven't been around Muggle party elections." Milton's curiosity was obvious. "What do they do?" Eddie's grin widened. "Anything to win." He leaned back and adopted an air of smug profundity. "They'll raise themselves up at all costs and tear down their opponents by any means. Spinning pretty lies to attract votes, spreading nasty rumors to smear rivals, all perfectly normal." Scott nodded. "That's basically it." Milton stared. They want to smear Dumbledore and Miss Burns? How is that possible? Dumbledore's the greatest wizard of our age. Everyone knows that. Too naive, Eddie said, shaking his head. He sounded almost contemptuous. People love gossip. The more perfect someone seems, the more they'll dig for flaws. That's human nature. Milton still looked unconvinced. You're contradicting yourself. You just said Dumbledore's influence is like you-know-who's terror, rooted, unquestioned. No, Eddie waved a finger. It's just that no one's ever tried to smear him before, so no one even imagines it. But that doesn't make slander useless. If someone starts, it'll turn into a carnival. He smiled like a man revealing a secret. Mark my words, as Hogwarts' self-styled gossip king, if it isn't stopped, the outcome will surprise everyone. How could that happen? Milton repeated stubbornly. Eddie shrugged. Won't be hard. People love scandals. The bigger the scandal, the more they devour it. After they see it, they'll believe it. Roger, who had just come in, joined in. In the Muggle press, the royal scandals sell the most papers. Don't forget, Scott added, Rita Skeeter is part of the Wizarding Council. The three roommates' mouths fell open. That woman, she's something else. This is going to be explosive. I don't think Dumbledore will fight back, someone muttered. We have to do something, Eddie declared, suddenly thrilled. I bet Headmaster Dumbledore hasn't thought about this. He's never had to deal with this filth. Scott nodded, amused. Eddie was practically vibrating. I've decided. I'll take on Rita Skeeter, the former Queen of News. I'll strike where she's most proud. He threw his hands in the air. When the old king falls, the new king rises. I, Eddie, will be the future king of magical media. Scott smiled. So you're going to publish something to smear Mr. Greaves? Eddie's grin froze. He looked at Milton, then stammered. I was only joking. Heh heh. Milton only hesitated a moment, then his eyes lit up. If it helps stop my father becoming minister, I'll support you, Eddie. Eddie stared. Are you serious, Milton? He sounded stunned. Smear him? Just like that? Milton's expression was oddly serene. Let him lose his usefulness. Maybe he'll be safer that way. He offered an innocent little smile. Besides, that's the price he might have to pay. Scott blinked. Had Milton just gone dark? He glanced at the others. Milton's eyes were as clear as ever. Scott muttered under his breath and then brightened. If you don't mind, Milton, then I'll start preparing too. Eddie was already fired up. Of course, not just Greaves but his backers and Rita Skeeter herself. I need a list. Scott handed over the names with a grin. Good, get to work. I'll start now, Eddie said. I need a pen name. No one will publish an article in the Daily Prophet without credentials. He dashed to the small desk by the window. No time to lose. I have to write the most explosive piece and build my byline fast. I can't start in the Daily Prophet, but the Quibbler. That's a good stepping stone. The others watched as Eddie grabbed a quill and disappeared into a feverish concentration. A week later, under the pen name Hollingworth, he published his first public piece in the Quibbler. News Queen Rita Skeeter, A Life Built on Vanity and Lies. The article dissected Rita's methods, alleged her penchant for fabricating sensational stories, and attacked her vanity. The piece pretended to be objective, but every paragraph nudged the reader to despise Rita. Comments on her appearance, jabs at her professionalism, innuendo about her character. With Luna's help, Scott and the others got hold of the issue as soon as it reached Hogwarts. Eddie never admitted publicly that he'd written it, but he'd done everything possible to stir a debate within the school, and the article did its job. People read it and talked. Scott watched Eddie bask in private satisfaction and asked, "What now?" "Wait," Eddie said, sounding mysteriously wise. "Wait for what?" Roger played along. "For Skeeter's counterattack," Eddie answered confidently. "Skeeter will hit back?" Milton frowned. "She's more famous than you. You could be outclassed." Eddie snorted. "She is famous, but that's fine. Everything's under my control." He looked at Milton as if daring him to doubt. "Skeeter's the most watched reporter in the British magical world. If I start a war of words with her, I'll get the same attention fast. Once the topic heats up, even the Daily Prophet will publish my pieces. They'll want the argument to continue. Did you plan this all along?" Milton asked, surprised. "Basic strategy," Eddie said, delighted with himself. Roger reached over and ruffled his hair. "Don't get too cocky, future king of magic media." Just as Eddie had predicted, Rita Skeeter published a reply the next day on the letters page of the Evening Prophet. The Evening Prophet? Eddie said, smirking. At this stage, she'd only get space on the worst page. Scott and the others ignored his commentary and read Skeeter's piece. Rita Skeeter, a conscientious reporter's monologue. She wasn't running scared. In clinical, patronizing tones, Rita attacked the quibbler for its lack of professionalism. She claimed she'd never heard of any reporter named Hollingworth and suggested the byline was a publicity stunt. Rita reminded readers of her many achievements, exclusive interviews, best-selling biographies, scoops she'd broken, and presented herself as a trusted, conscientious journalist who sought the truth. She even issued a measured apology for engaging with such a trivial slander, insisting that, as a professional, she owed readers clarity. "Putting on an act," Eddie snorted. "But I've got a plan for a counterattack." He dug through his trunk and triumphantly held up an old newspaper. The clipping showed Scott seeing Milton off at Hastings Station. The headline read something like, "Reluctant farewell. Is the boy obsessed with Travers seeing another love?" And the caption had referred to Milton as a girl. "This is proof," Eddie crowed. "She misreported Milton. She writes him up as a girl." Scott and Milton both went pale. Eddie, oblivious, continued, "Scott's a celebrity now. People care about him, and Milton's Mr. Greaves' son. That'll attract attention. If I use this error to attack Skeeter's credibility, more people will read it. This time I'll pitch it to the Evening Prophet." "Are you sure you want to dredge up that mistake?" Scott said through clenched teeth. "Oh, Eddie," Milton grabbed the paper and shook his head. "Please, let it be. Let people forget this." Eddie froze, bewildered. "You don't want me to clear it up? I'm trying to vindicate you." "Vindicate?" Scott snapped. "Everybody's already forgotten. Bringing it back will just embarrass us more." Eddie looked from Scott to Milton and finally relented. Okay, if you don't want it, I'll find something else." "Good," Scott said quickly. "Milton and I aren't public figures. Don't use that. Find a more serious flaw in her work. Something professional. That'll hurt her more." Eddie nodded and dove back into the pile of old papers. Scott and Milton breathed easier. That embarrassing misreport was finally going to be left alone. Better to attack Rita on the grounds that would do the most damage, not by resurrecting a childish blunder, but by exposing real failures in her professional reporting. 452. Hollingworth's victory. After being bluntly turned down by Scott and Milton, Eddie didn't lose heart. He blew up. Determined to get his article published, he downed a wakefulness potion and pulled 2 all-nighters. 2 days later, with heavy, dark circles under his eyes, he told Scott and the others, "While people are still paying attention, I have to write something now." The Evening Prophet can't refuse. His effort paid off. That evening, the Evening Prophet ran his laboriously crafted piece, counting Rita Skeeter's 99 lies. Eddie, drained to the last drop, died with a smile. He simply fell asleep at the dinner table, half a beef patty still in his mouth. Scott and the others stared for a moment, then laughed and started reading the article themselves. Milton was amazed. He actually found 99 faults in Skeeter's past pieces. Scott exhaled. "And each one's substantial. None of this casual mudslinging," Roger grinned. "Ha! He even frames it like he's a concerned colleague, reminding her of mistakes and asking her to do better. That's brilliant." After dinner, they carried Eddie back to the dorm, tossed a few cleaning charms on him, and dumped him on his bed. In a short time, Eddie's article set Hogwarts talking. Rita Skeeter had been a hugely successful and famous reporter, but her fearless, irresponsible style had offended plenty of people. Many at Hogwarts took pleasure in seeing her taken down a peg. Even those who didn't dislike her enjoyed the spectacle. Eddie slept until the next afternoon. Fortunately, it was the weekend. That evening, Scott returned from the room of requirement to find his roommates buzzing about Rita Skeeter's reply. "Hiding your real name? A qualified reporter should be braver." Scott read aloud. Rita's response was textbook Skeeter, a short piece that feigned wounded innocence while subtly attacking her accuser. She portrayed herself as rattled, grateful for readers' support, and insulted by the suggestion that this was merely a helpful colleague pointing out mistakes. The thrust of the piece was simple. Someone was trying to smear her and make Hollingworth famous overnight. Would a genuine friend who wanted to help really compile 99 faults in 2 days? No, a hidden, cowardly reporter who refused to use his name could not be trusted. Still, she added, "Thank you, Mr. Hollingworth, for pointing out a few errors, and thank you to her loyal readers." In the end, she urged her readers to be skeptical of anonymous voices. "It's impressive," Scott admitted. Eddie chuckled. "She shrinks my 99 into a handful, apologizes preemptively, and paints me as cowardly. Suddenly, it's hard to rebut point by point." "Is that it?" Milton said, a little disappointed. "All that 2 nights of work, gone?" Eddie laughed, but it was a strange, thrilled sound. "I expected this. The Queen of News doesn't go down easily." He sat up and smiled. "This battle is fair, Hollingworth. My pen name doesn't have the credibility she's built, but she also can't attack me personally." "Consider it begun," he said. He was clearly savoring the fight. Scott rolled his eyes. "Eddie, I'm glad you're enjoying this, but could you stop cackling like some over-the-top cartoon villain?" "Which movie?" Eddie asked, genuinely curious. Scott ignored him. Reinvigorated, Eddie struck again, this time aiming at Rita's seeming omniscience. Skeeter had an uncanny habit of publishing private conversations and intimate details as if she overheard everything. That was a big part of why people feared her. Eddie contacted several of those victims, invited them to speak on the record, and accused Skeeter of invading their privacy. Scott knew how Skeeter got her information, but he didn't tell Eddie. Eddie was enjoying the chase, and Scott didn't want to spoil his fun. Besides, Eddie's current maneuvers were only the prelude. His ultimate target was the Minister for Magic election. If he needed a decisive strike later, Scott still had Rita's secret up his sleeve. Perhaps Eddie, once fully determined, wouldn't disappoint. For a while, the back and forth between Hollingworth and Rita Skeeter became the hottest topic in the British magical world. They traded articles in the Evening Prophet almost daily. The row escalated, more people tuned in, and both writers got larger and more prominent space in the paper. Though they hadn't quite reached the front page, they were directly underneath it, and everyone was eager to see what would happen next. To everyone's surprise, Eddie began to gain the upper hand. The gossip king of Hogwarts had been at work. Over the years, he had quietly built a web of contacts through his trading and socializing. He could name first years from every house and call in favors that others didn't know existed. Those small, unobtrusive connections produced the information he needed at crucial moments. Scott admitted it felt like watching a born entrepreneur. "He doesn't even take payment from the paper." Eddie boasted, "I didn't ask for money because I wanted to hide my identity, and once she responded, she was doomed. The best way not to be used by me is to ignore me. As soon as she answers, she shares her fame with me. Even if I lose the war, I only lose a pen name. I can make another." "Couldn't she see that?" Roger asked. "Of course," Eddie said with a theatrical shake of his head. "But she wants the attention. The Queen of News can't walk away from a spotlight, and Walheim, she thought she could control this. She overestimated herself." Scott grinned. "Well played." Eddie sobered. "This is only the beginning. Right now, I've got seed capital and the Hollingworth name has a bit of influence, but that's not enough. To prepare for the Wizarding Council's public opinion offensive, I need to change my style. I can't just be the guy who ridicules Rita. I need other articles to build a professional reputation." He already had a plan. He also thanked Scott for the help. Scott's behind-the-scenes work had mattered. "I didn't do much," Scott protested. "Just a little help." It really was small stuff. Sending crows to scout information Eddie couldn't get, quietly watching Daily Prophet staffers close to Skeeter, and using a few harmless secrets to nudge them away from always siding with her. Those moves smoothed the way for the bigger public battle. Over the following weeks, Eddie continued to trade barbs with Skeeter to keep attention on him, but he also began submitting more serious pieces, objective-ish analyses of the ministerial candidates, articles the public was hungry for as the election approached. He failed twice before finding the right angle. When he finally landed one, it drew significant attention. As always, Scott's minor nudges helped, but the main credit went to Eddie. He had a knack for making a dry topic compelling. By mid-September, Hollingworth had become a recognized name. Eddie's articles even appeared in the Daily Prophet, which carried more authority than the Evening Prophet. Rita Skeeter's reputation had taken a hit, and she lay low for a while. The war with the Queen of News wound down, and Eddie's days of frantic activity eased into a steadier rhythm. He only needed to publish every few days to stay relevant. On Tuesday, September 20th, owls flew over the Great Hall during breakfast, dropping letters and papers. Eddie took a copy of the Daily Prophet and scanned it. "It's starting," he said, "the Wizarding Council's public opinion offensive." Scott put down his knife and fork and read his own paper. The front page had routine news, but on the second page there was a pointed commentary, Burns, or Dumbledore. Scott read the piece aloud. The author suggested Dumbledore's endorsement of Mr. Burns was a move to exert secret control over the ministry. Milton, who'd also read it, chimed in. "It drags in Fudge, too. The piece says Fudge rose with Dumbledore's backing and constantly consulted him after taking office." Scott smiled tightly. "This is just a prelude. With Dumbledore's current standing, he'd get most wizards' support if he ran himself." "Exactly," Eddie said, chuckling. "They're planting the seed. If they start, they'll slowly try to slander Dumbledore's reputation next." 453. Scott in second place. "So people probably won't take this review article seriously," Scott said. "But when you add the Wizarding Council's actions afterward, it changes things." "I'm ready for that," Eddie replied confidently. "The Council's public opinion campaign is destined to fail." Scott didn't argue. It wasn't that Eddie's few articles could single-handedly swing public opinion or decide the minister's election. The real reason was that the Council was already on the back foot. After Medea was cursed into slumber, Mr. Greaves's chances of becoming minister had plummeted. The so-called public opinion battle was a last-ditch effort by other members of the Council. Even without Eddie's interference, Mr. Greaves was less likely to win than Ms. Burns. William, who had already become an inside agent, was no fan of the Council's plans either. Scott and Eddie had joined in mostly to eliminate the possibility of Mr. Greaves becoming minister, to help Milton and to give Mr. Greaves room to breathe. Eddie, of course, was also driven by curiosity and interest. Events unfolded exactly as they expected. Reporters published similar opinion pieces in the Daily Prophet day after day, ever more obvious attacks and slanders directed at Dumbledore and Ms. Burns. It didn't stop at the Prophet. The Evening Prophet, which leaned toward gossip and entertainment, even ran a scandalous photo of Dumbledore and Ms. Burns in conversation, showing them appearing unusually close. The moment that piece of gossip hit Hogwarts, it exploded. Unlike the earlier political pieces, which cast Dumbledore in a maliciously political light but failed to grip most readers, this clearly false gossip set people alight. Most students didn't really believe there was anything between Dumbledore and Miss Burns. Dumbledore was, after all, over 100 years old. Still, many students reveled in the joke, and even the skeptical took pleasure in the scandal. "See," Eddie said to Milton, "people love scandals. They care about the drama, not the truth." "I didn't expect Hogwarts students to be influenced by this kind of news," Milton said uneasily. "It's probably worse outside the school," Scott added. "It looks like Hollingsworth will have to show herself next," Eddie said, impatient. Until then, Hollingsworth had only floated vague opinions and hadn't really fought back. "What a shame," he added dramatically. "The Queen of the Press took a beating from me last time. Her reputation's been hit. She may not want to step back into the ring." "She might not step in personally," Scott said. Rita Skeeter had long-standing ties to the Council. If she didn't act herself, she would certainly use her influence, directing others or supplying intelligence. "What will you do?" Milton asked Eddie. "Publish something to clear Dumbledore and Miss Burns's names?" Eddie shook his head. "Clear things up? No, I want to pour gasoline on the fire, turn a one-sided smear into a full-blown public war." He patted Milton on the shoulder. "Listen, I'm going to go after your father. I'll nitpick, slander, and exaggerate everything. The stories will get more and more outrageous." Milton froze. "What's the point of that?" "People follow the crowd and like to think they're clever," Eddie said with a laugh. "Before I started my attacks, a lot of people might have been swayed by those articles and formed a bad impression of Dumbledore and Burns. But if I intensify the offensive until it becomes obviously absurd, readers will start to realize something's off. They'll see it as mutual mudslinging around the ministerial election," Eddie continued. "Then the self-proclaimed smart ones, The people who like to believe they see through everything will adopt a superior, rational attitude. They'll watch the back and forth like a farce and stop believing the slanders. Roger, who rarely praised Eddie, said, "That's brilliant. You've understood the whole system." Eddie put his hands on his hips and smiled. "Humph, future media mogul, remember that." "I see what you mean, Eddie," Milton said slowly. Eddie asked, "Are you really not going to mind?" Milton shook his head. "I don't mind. Do whatever you think will work, as long as the result is good." He muttered under his breath, "I'll just not read the papers for a few days." Scott chuckled. Milton's complaints about Mr. Greaves were never far from the surface. The public scene then developed exactly as Eddie predicted. When Hollingsworth declared her stance, a war of public opinion truly erupted. The council's planned smears of Dumbledore and Burns started to look like a ridiculous squabble to many readers. Eddie, with far more experience dishwashing gossip than the council's reporters, leaned into the melodrama. He exploited Mr. Greaves's alleged abandonment of his wife and child, inventing increasingly lurid details. Readers loved it, devouring the stories like a serialized soap opera. Part of the effect came from Mrs. Zabini's notorious past. Although Milton had hoped to let things be, he couldn't help monitoring the fallout. Eddie's portrayals made Milton seem like a pitiable, abandoned child, and the sympathetic looks from strangers made him painfully sensitive. Meanwhile, Hollingsworth continued to attack Mr. Greaves from every angle. Politically, he was weak compared to Ms. Burns. His prior positions had not been prominent enough, and he had not been in the public eye long enough. Time marched on to the last day of September. As expected, Ms. Burns, head of the Legal Enforcement Squad, was elected Minister for Magic. Sympathy, pity, and a fair bit of schadenfreude followed Milton everywhere. He didn't have time to dwell on it. That evening, he received another message from Mr. Greaves on his enchanted phone. After talking with his father, Milton told Scott and the others, he said the council has probably abandoned him. They're angry from their defeat and aren't offering him any support. Eddie shrugged. Ms. Burns will likely reshuffle him out of the Secretary General position and replace him with her own people. My father said the same, Milton said. He thinks their refusal to support him might just be a tantrum, but his usefulness has decreased and fewer people will be watching him. That's a good thing, Scott said. The deeper you're tied in, the more dangerous it is. Milton smiled. Dad also said his marriage to Mrs. Zabini was arranged at Miss Slytherin's suggestion. He and Mrs. Zabini were never close. They'll divorce soon. Scott and the others fell silent for a moment, then quickly congratulated Milton. His family might be restored to a normal state, at least in their eyes. No one said aloud what they were thinking. October arrived the next day. Hogwarts grew tense. As agreed, in October, the professors would start signing recommendation letters for students they favored. Everyone hoping to compete in the Triwizard tournament began to act. Everyone wanted to be among the first to collect 5 recommendation letters, or at least be in the top 25, so they could be put forward by Hogwarts to exchange with Beauxbatons and possibly be chosen as champions. After a month of waiting, impatience finally broke. It was a Saturday. Scott arrived early at Professor Flitwick's office. "Oh, I knew you'd come, Scott," Flitwick said with a smile. "Of course, I think you'll be on the list of students going to Beauxbatons." Scott returned the smile. "Thank you, Professor. I'm confident as well." "Very good." Flitwick quickly wrote the recommendation and handed it to him. "Go see the other professors. Don't waste time. Come back to me once you've secured a spot." Scott bowed and left. He next visited Professor McGonagall. "Scott, I know why you're here," she said with a smile. "You are one of Hogwarts' outstanding students. Of course I'll give you a recommendation." She neatly wrote the letter. Scott thanked her and left, and in the corridor he bumped into Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "Oh, Scott, you got Professor McGonagall's recommendation," Hermione exclaimed, eyeing the parchment. "How many do you have?" she asked nervously. 2, Scott said, pulling the signed letter from Flitwick and the one from McGonagall. "Congratulations, you're fast," Harry said. Scott nodded. "Good luck, you 3. You might get them too." "We might," Ron said awkwardly. "Harry's famous and Hermione's grades are great." "Oh, don't say that, Ron," Harry mumbled, embarrassed. Scott kept his expression neutral. "Good luck." "Thanks," Hermione said. I think we actually have a chance. As far as I know, you're not 17 yet either. Good luck, Scott said, waved, and moved on. Over the day, he visited Professor Vector, Professor Babbling, and Professor Slughorn, and by the end had secured 5 recommendation letters. Slughorn had kept him to chat a while, so when Scott arrived at the headmaster's office, Cedric was already there. "Oh, Scott, you're second," Cedric said with a friendly smile. Scott sighed. "I suppose I'm still not as popular as you, Cedric." "Don't say that," Cedric replied modestly. "I'm just a few months older. I meet the age requirement, so the professors were more than willing." Dumbledore took Scott's 5 letters with a cheerful nod. "You are both students I favor. I believe you will represent Hogwarts well." They thanked him and left together. As they walked, Cedric spoke with a touch of cunning frankness. "It sounds sly to say it, but I'm relieved you don't meet the age requirement. Otherwise, I'm not sure I would be confident about being chosen as Hogwarts champion." Scott laughed. "Oh? You're confident now? There'll be a 7th-year candidate, you know." Cedric's confidence shone through. "Of course, if I'm participating, it's because I believe in myself." Scott countered. "If the rule that champions must be 17 is absolute, fine. But if there's any way around it, I'll try to enter." Cedric started, then smiled again. "If you can find a way to get around the rule, it only proves you're better suited to be champion than I am. When that happens, I'll congratulate you. After all, we both want to represent Hogwarts." "You rascal," Scott said, laughing. "You really are a good fellow." Cedric shrugged, then patted Scott's shoulder. "Don't get cocky. That's just your hypothesis. I haven't conceded." "We'll see when the time comes," Scott said. "Of course, if you become champion, I'll sincerely congratulate you." "Thank you." "Don't thank me so soon. Maybe the selection will surprise you, and I'll manage to get around the rules. Then let's wait and see. To all my dear readers, Happy New Year." After saying goodbye to Cedric, Scott made his way alone to the room of requirement. As he slipped into the study, a voice drifted from the painting on the walls, tinged with regret. "What a pity, Scott." He stepped closer. "Why do you say that?" Helena in the painting lounged sideways in a large, soft armchair, chin propped on her hand. "I'm talking about the Triwizard Tournament." She pouted. "You're not yet 17, so you can't be Hogwarts champion." Scott smiled. "That's not necessarily true." "Oh?" Helena sat up straighter and stared at him from the canvas. "Do you intend to bypass the age rule? An aging potion?" "No," Scott said, shaking his head. "Not an aging potion." "Then what's your plan?" Her curiosity sharpened. "I don't know," he replied, oddly confident. Helena in the painting bristled. "Are you joking?" "Not at all," Scott said. "If the organizers filter out underage applicants purely by records, then I'm out. But I don't think they'll do that." Another voice answered, similar to the girl in the painting but older, steadier. The ghost of Helena flickered into being in the study. Scott turned. "Although it's been centuries since the last Triwizard Tournament, written records still exist if you look carefully," she said. "What goblet of fire?" the painted Helena asked. Before the ghost had entered the study, the painting had been inactive and knew nothing of the goblet. The ghost Helena explained the goblet's role, how it chose the most suitable student to be champion. Then she looked at Scott. "Your first task will be to get your name into the Goblet of Fire. That won't be easy." Scott shrugged. "Whether it's magic or alchemy, there's always a way to work around it. I don't yet know how I'll get my name in, but I'll find a way." The painted Helena sniffed. "You're very confident. Don't make a mess of it." The ghost Helena smiled more kindly. "It's a pity the tournament isn't at Hogwarts. I'd very much like to see how you perform, Scott." The Helena in the painting asked, "Do you think so highly of him?" "Of course," the ghost answered. "Scott is the most remarkable student in Ravenclaw right now. Besides that, he's Mother's apprentice." "For Mother's sake," the painted Helena said, glancing at Scott, "I hope you won't bring shame to Mother or Ravenclaw." "I hope not either," Scott replied, then slipped into the inner room. The Ravenclaw mentor in the painting watched him. "You intend to enter the Triwizard Tournament as a champion?" she asked. "Yes." Scott sat down. "I have some ideas. I wanted to wait until the magic-enhancing potion is finished." "But that potion will take half a year," Scott continued. "That's too late for the tournament, so I'll try a lower-tier approach first. I won't aim for perfection right away. With my current transfiguration, I can make constructs, summon beasts, with basic intelligence and autonomous combat ability. They won't be permanent companions like Lambo, but they'll fight for me. Including fire, the mentor asked, and water, earth, and wind, Scott added. So 4 elements altogether. You taught me the runic circuits for those. I can make them. The painting nodded. Scott hesitated, then said, I have another idea I'm not so confident about and would like your guidance. Ravenclaw brightened. Tell me. I've labeled this set of runic circuits Ice Ocean Starry Illusion. Scott produced a mariner's astrolabe. I extracted this runic circuit from the astrolabe, but it's incredibly complex. He drew his wand and traced in the air. Golden threads blossomed, forming an elaborate runic pattern. He watched the intricate design, fascinated. I can reproduce it, but I don't understand it. What do you hope to achieve? The portrait asked. If I can analyze this circuit and gain the ability to manipulate illusions, my combat options would become much more flexible. Ravenclaw studied the pattern closely. After a long moment, she said, I understand it now. It's extraordinarily clever, of a type I've never tried before. Your idea is excellent, but it's very difficult to realize. Explain, Scott urged. To reproduce the specific illusions you saw, most of the ancient runes in this circuit are designed to manifest the things inside the illusion itself, she said. Scott felt a flicker of disappointment. To control those illusions freely, he would have to master a great many ancient runes and combine them perfectly with the illusion component of this circuit. One wrong rune and the illusion would look fake. Unless his brain worked like a supercomputer, it would be almost impossible. He pushed the disappointment aside quickly. Even so, the research value is huge. Even a few simple illusions would be valuable. Pure blackness to blind an opponent, an illusionary flock of crows to confuse or mask, things like that. Ideas surged through his mind. Ravenclaw smiled faintly. Your brain never stops. Then let's begin focused teaching, she said. Once you gain a firm grasp of this circuit, you can work towards simpler illusions first. Scott sat down eager and ready, pulling out a pen and notebook. However many ideas he had, he knew he had to study diligently to make them real. He worked until he felt dizzy, then left the room of requirement at dinner. He had skipped lunch and ate a hearty meal. Afterwards, he went to Professor Flitwick's office. Flitwick was grading papers. The wooden chair slid around to face Scott, and the teapot and cups began to pour themselves. Please, have a seat, Flitwick said, placing his quill in the inkwell. I came because of the Tri-Wizard tournament, Flitwick said, before Scott could speak. I already know some things about the Goblet of Fire, Scott replied. Flitwick's eyes lit up. Ah, you're thinking of becoming a champion, aren't you? I would love to see a Ravenclaw represent Hogwarts. Scott smiled. If there's a way around the age rule, I'll try my best. For the tournament's fairness, I can't say too much, Flitwick warned, though he leaned forward. But there are ways to bypass the age regulation. Thank you, Scott said. Flitwick patted his knee. I can't say any more. It will depend on your own actions. Scott left, feeling buoyant. Expelliarmus, he called as he turned a corner, and something flew into his hand. A wand. He idly examined it. Hawthorn, usually paired with unicorn hair, suited to complex wizards. This is yours, Malfoy. Nearby, Draco Malfoy stood facing Harry and his friends. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had their wands out. Hermione wore a fierce expression Scott rarely saw. Malfoy's cronies, Goyle and Crabbe, had their wands pointed as well, and Parkinson, Malfoy's female companion, was there. At Scott's voice, Goyle and Crabbe hesitated, then quickly lowered their wands when they recognized him. Parkinson was less intimidated. Give Draco his wand back, Trollope, she snapped. Don't give it to him, Scott. Ron said immediately, indignation flaring. That git deserves a punishment. What happened? Scott asked calmly. She was mouthing off, Hermione said. Harry ground his teeth. They were insulting Dumbledore. Those newspaper things are lies. Who knows? Malfoy sneered. He looked thinner and worn, but his eyes were bright. For a moment he'd seemed afraid of Scott. Then he straightened, throwing back his chin with his usual arrogance. Do you know Dumbledore well? We do, Ron answered without hesitation. Dumbledore's the greatest wizard of this age. Malfoy curled his lip. Of course you do. Weasleys would practically kneel and lick Dumbledore's boots. Ron's face flushed with anger, nostrils flaring. Harry snapped back with a cruel laugh. You're vivid, Draco. It's funny coming from you. Your whole lot probably kneels and licks Lord Voldemort's boots. Oh, right, he doesn't wear shoes. Malfoy's pale face reddened. And you? He was about to retort when Scott cut in. Enough. He took a step forward. While I'm here, you're not going to fight. Calmly, he tossed the wand back to Malfoy. I won't intervene further, but I can stop you. You all know that. Malfoy snatched his wand with a scowl and stalked off. Goyle, Crabbe, and Parkinson hurried after him. As they left, Ron called out louder than necessary. Scott, you should have given them a lesson. Scott shrugged. I still want to go to Beauxbatons. If Professor McGonagall found out, you wouldn't be allowed to go, Ron muttered, slumping. Scott changed the subject. Did you all gather recommendation letters? The three shook their heads. Professor McGonagall said the favors will likely go to older students, Hermione said, indignant. It's fine if we don't go, Harry added. I don't want 1,000 people staring at the scar on my head like I'm in a zoo. Scott could tell Harry wasn't being completely truthful. Who wouldn't want to see Beauxbatons? But he didn't press. You don't need to be disappointed. I'll be handling a live stream of the Tri-Wizard tournament. Fred and George will take care of Hogwarts' it's a live stream. Harry's eyes widened. How? Hogwarts doesn't have televisions, Hermione said, surprised. Ron frowned. What's live streaming? It's simple. I've made devices that can stream the events remotely. Ask Fred and George if you want the details. Scott didn't elaborate. He waved and left to make arrangements. Back in the dormitory, he took out the Book of Prometheus and wrote to his friend Lucio at Beauxbatons, telling him he'd be visiting with the Hogwarts delegation on the last day of October. Lucio replied almost immediately. Oh, welcome to Beauxbatons, Scott. I have new alchemical works I want to show you. You'll be amazed, I promise. Lucio's reply barely mentioned the tournament. He was still all about alchemy. He ended the note cheerfully. Happy New Year. Wishing everyone a prosperous year. 455. Announcement of the list of 25, early on October 2nd, the latest edition of the Daily Prophet set everyone talking. The headline ran, Minister for Magic Susan Bones delivers inaugural speech, resolutely combat all dark forces. Scott finished reading the article. Minister Bones's speech read almost like a declaration of war against Lord Voldemort and the Death Eaters. She had carried the same uncompromising stance she'd been known for as head of the Legal Enforcement Squad, bluntly declaring her determination to fight the dark forces. What do you all think? Eddie asked. This is good, Milton said. Minister Bones's attitude can give people hope. Ever since You-Know-Who showed himself again, a lot of wizards have been living in despair. Luna, looking at the solemn photograph of Bones, said, her stance is very strong. Maybe she should be extra careful. Don't say that, Kayla protested, her face going pale. Would You-Know-Who really lead the Death Eaters to attack the Ministry of Magic? They'd do anything. Dylan, her boyfriend, frowned. Besides, You-Know-Who is too powerful. Unless it's Dumbledore, no one can really stop him. Roger cut in. Our new minister is in a dangerous position now, especially since she announced she'd send Aurors to arrest wanted Death Eaters at their homes. That will definitely rile them up. She must have thought it through and still did it, Eddie said, staring at the picture, his eyes flickering. I think she's a remarkable minister. But is it really good? Kayla said. If something happens to her, won't everyone who's already afraid of You-Know-Who fall into even deeper despair? She looked increasingly pale. My father says that more than 10 years ago, the Death Eaters did unspeakable things. People died. That families were torn apart. I can't imagine what they'll do if they're provoked. She sounded pessimistic and frightened, not only for Minister Bones, but for her own family. Dylan leaned in to whisper reassurances to her. Milton turned to Scott. Scott, what do you think? Scott had kept his opinions to himself. He figured Bones wouldn't make such an aggressive declaration on a whim. She must have weighed the risks. Statements like that could shore up the ministry's authority, but if they failed, the backlash could be worse. Maybe Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix were already involved, or they had a plan. Still, facing Milton's question, he shrugged. There's nothing we students can do. We'll have to trust the new minister. After breakfast, Scott pulled Luna aside. You said Bones should watch her safety. Did you sense something? Luna shook her head. I just have a feeling she should be careful. A hunch? Scott said. He knew Luna's instincts were often uncannily accurate. Could Bones really be in danger? What would we even do? Even if we warned her, she'd probably ignore it. The fact she spoke like that shows she's decided what she wants to do. Luna nodded. I think she's the sort of person who will bravely move forward. The conversation moved on to the Tri-Wizard tournament. It's a pity I couldn't get 5 recommendation letters, Luna said regretfully, then brightened. But I'm sure you'll get the biggest applause, Scott. Thank you, he said. After saying goodbye to her, Scott spent the day in the room of requirements studying. In the evening, he left the room and went to Professor Flitwick's office to borrow Ravenclaw's diadem, achieving mastery over that set of ancient rune circuits. On his walk back to the dormitory, he reviewed the composition of the whole circuit in his head. With the Ravenclaw mentor's help, the circuit that had originally been called the Ice, Ocean, Starry Sky illusion had been stripped of the elements that created a specific illusion. What remained was a blank framework, what they called the blank illusion. Scott only needed to fill it with the ancient runes he had mastered and maintain the circuit's structural stability to generate a new illusion. That, however, was extremely difficult and would require countless attempts and a bit of luck. He was already prepared to borrow the diadem again as needed, and Felix Felicis was even under consideration. Over the next few days, Scott spent most of his time building illusions. His trips to Professor Flitwick's office to borrow the diadem became more frequent. Fortunately, Flitwick knew the experiments were in preparation for the Tri-Wizard tournament and gave his approval. October 15th was a Saturday. That evening, Scott arrived in the Great Hall to find the professors seated at the staff table. He went to the Ravenclaw table and asked his roommate, "What's going on?" "Dumbledore's going to announce the list of the 25 students who will go to Beauxbatons," Eddie said. "Didn't you see the notice board?" Scott shook his head. He'd been in the room of requirement early and missed it when he came in. Just then, Dumbledore stood and addressed the whole hall. The 25 students chosen to represent Hogwarts at Beauxbatons for the Tri-Wizard tournament have been selected. In order, they are Cedric Diggory, Scott Trollope, Terrence Higgs, Angelina Johnson. Each name drew applause from the long tables of the 4 houses. When Angelina's name was called, Scott glanced at Fred. The younger Weasley looked a little sheepish, probably regretting having given up too soon. Ethan Cooper, Caccini Strozzi, Roger Davies. When Roger's name was announced, Scott stared in surprise. You never said anything." Eddie's eyes went wide. "Roger, you actually made it, and you kept it from us." "Congratulations, Roger," Milton said, and others joined in. Roger pretended to be nonchalant, tossing his head. "Oh, it's nothing. I heard there are lots of pretty girls at Beauxbatons. I couldn't miss it." With Hogwarts no longer the target of his attentions, Roger, who'd been in a dry spell, was suddenly back to exuding charm. Scott smiled inwardly, curious to see how his roommate would fare. He hoped, privately, that Roger wouldn't fall for any Vila-descended girls while they were abroad. Scott chuckled to himself. He was looking forward to seeing how it all played out. The applause died down. Dumbledore's voice rose again. "Our professors will conduct some basic tests and training for the 25 of you before your departure." He looked around the staff table. Professor McGonagall will be in charge of etiquette. Professor Moody and Professor Flitwick will oversee practical combat training. The 3 professors named all nodded. Only Professor Flitwick smiled. McGonagall and Moody both looked stern. "Training begins tomorrow," Dumbledore added. "Those on the list should be in the largest classroom on the 2nd floor before 9 o'clock. With that, he dismissed them to their meal. At the Ravenclaw table, Roger pouted. "Seriously?" he muttered. "Do students like me, who don't even want to be champions, have to go through training too?" "You shouldn't complain," Eddie snapped. "Do you know how many people envy you?" Roger grinned. "Maybe it's a necessary test to meet those French girls." The next morning, Scott and Roger went to the largest classroom together. The 3 professors were already there. "Just wait a moment," Professor McGonagall said, nodding. "We'll start when everyone's arrived." They didn't have to wait long. All 25 were present, and a crowd of curious students had gathered outside to watch. "Everyone not involved, please leave," Professor McGonagall announced. Most of the onlookers, reluctant but obedient, began to drift away. Not Fred and George Weasley. The twins pushed to the front of the doorway, protesting loudly. "We're not unrelated personnel," Fred said. "We're Hogwarts students," George added. "We'll be representing Hogwarts at Beauxbatons. We should make sure they don't disgrace us." The twins spoke in perfect, indignant unison. Several of the 25 shots daggers at them. McGonagall's expression tightened. "Mr. Weasley," she said, moving to the door, "every student on this list was recommended by 5 professors. The 3 of us are more than capable of making a fair judgment." Her calm words seemed to inflate many of the chosen students with pride. They puffed their chests and stared at the twins. Fred immediately dropped his mischievous face and tried on a serious look. "Of course, Professor McGonagall, we trust your judgment," George added, "but we value the school's honor above all. We'd like to participate." A few of the students outside traded scoffing looks. Scott spotted the dark-skinned girl leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, watching Fred and George with a half-smile. "Angelina," Roger said, understanding. He looked her over appreciatively. "Fred has good taste. Maybe he doesn't want Angelina to end up someone else's dance partner at the Christmas ball," Scott muttered. "How would you know about a Christmas ball?" Roger asked. "I have sources," Scott said casually. At the door, the twins continued to pester. "Enough, Mr. Weasley," Professor McGonagall said, about to shut them down, when Professor Moody spoke up. "Oh, if they want to help, let them help, Minerva." He turned his magical eye to the students outside, and a grin that wasn't comforting spread across his scarred face. "We'll need opponents for training." "This will be chaotic, Alastair," McGonagall said, annoyed. "The students are enthusiastic. Let them observe, but that's enough." Professor Flitwick chimed in on the side of allowing it, though in a much gentler way than Moody's. Their combined nudging made it hard for McGonagall to refuse outright. Finally, she sighed. "You may come in and help," she said sternly, "but if anyone misbehaves or interferes with our team members, I will make them leave." The students' cheers were snuffed by her tone. Fred and George stopped their antics and filed in obediently. Fred winked at Angelina and gave a triumphant thumbs up when McGonagall turned away. "As for space," Professor Flitwick said, tapping his wand, "this classroom is rather cramped." McGonagall flicked her wand as well, and together their charms stretched the room until it was much larger. A dueling platform rose in the center. Roger nudged Scott. "What do you think the Weasleys will do next?" Scott shrugged. "They'll probably try to beat someone in the training so they can take their spot." "Would the professors allow that? That would make Dumbledore's rules meaningless." "McGonagall wouldn't allow it. Moody might. They have a chance." "I just hope they don't go after me," Roger said. Fred and George breezed up to Scott and Roger. "Hey, brothers," Fred said, "don't leave us out." Roger bumped Fred lightly. "Good luck," he said. "Otherwise, I'll invite Angelina to be my dance partner." Fred's grin vanished for a moment and then snapped back. "Fine, go ahead," he said. "If I don't get to go to Beauxbatons after trying my best, you can have Angelina." Roger's jaw dropped. Scott and George stared at Fred in disbelief. He was offering to let Roger dance with the girl he liked? Roger asked incredulously, "You trust me that much? Are you sure I won't chase her?" Fred rolled his eyes. "You haven't made a move in ages. That means no Hogwarts girl's interested in you right now." Roger smirked. "Just because you're not my type doesn't mean no one will be taken by my charms." Fred's eyes almost disappeared into the back of his head with an exasperated look. "Don't worry, Angelina isn't interested in you," he said. "She said she didn't understand what other girls saw in you. She compared you to Filch." He grinned. "She's close with Caccini, the one who slapped you. Caccini's on this team." Scott and George burst out laughing. Roger, face darkening, muttered, "I don't think she'll accept my invitation anyway." "She might," Roger said stubbornly. "Maybe she'll prefer a handsome boy with French romantic charm." "I'm going to Beauxbatons," Fred snapped. "Good luck," Roger said, and his smile returned. The classroom finished expanding. The dueling stage stood ready. Professor McGonagall climbed onto it and addressed the 25. "When you go to another school, every word and action will reflect Hogwarts and its traditions. As the most outstanding group of students we could select, you must remember that always." Her speech was firmer and longer than Dumbledore's earlier remarks, but not overly so. It ended in a few minutes. Then Moody hobbled up onto the stage on his wooden leg, expression grave. "We all know what happened at this year's Quidditch World Cup final," he said. Faces in the room tightened. There was no humor left. For a time, Britain's hosting of the Quidditch World Cup fell to pieces, and we lost the chance to host the Tri-Wizard tournament. Moody's words hung heavy. Those events cost us face with the French and the Germans, foreign wizards. When you go abroad representing Hogwarts in Britain, you may encounter ridicule and blame, but you know what to do. His magical eye spun, sweeping the room, assessing. It stopped on Cassius Warrington, Slytherin chaser. "Mr. Warrington, tell us." Warrington's jaw tightened. "I will be a champion and win the title for Hogwarts," he said. It wasn't a bold declaration, but there was confidence. Moody shifted his gaze to Cedric. "Mr. Diggory, many call you the model Hogwarts student. What will you do?" Cedric smiled calmly. "Even if we face ridicule, we must use our best performance to silence doubters. Hogwarts is the best, and we will prove it." The professors exchanged looks. The answers pleased them. Moody's eyes spun again and fixed on Scott. "I'm curious about your answer, Mr. Trollope." Scott met the stare and was blunt. "We're still students," he said. "The Tri-Wizard is a competition between students. It shouldn't be inflated. As long as we do what students do, that should be enough." Moody gave a low laugh, more a sound than a friendly chuckle, and the scars on his face creased into something that could have been a smile or a sneer. "Is that so?" Scott nodded calmly. "Exactly. We're not the ones running the British magical world. Let them have their chaos. We just have to be students." Warrington bristled. He pointed at Scott and spat. "A person with such no sense of honor shouldn't represent Hogwarts. Professors, you should strip him of his place." A murmur rippled through the gathered students. Several who hadn't made the list looked pleased. Scott turned to Warrington. "You're not the one to judge me, Warrington. I see nothing wrong with what I said." Warrington's temper flared. He opened his mouth, but McGonagall cut in. "What Mr. Trollope said is not wrong," she told Warrington firmly. "You are students. Doing your duty as students is enough to meet the school's hopes." Warrington sputtered. McGonagall softened slightly. "That is not to say your point is wrong either, Mr. Warrington, Mr. Diggory." Moody tapped his cane on the platform with a sharp sound. "I only wanted to see your attitudes," he said. "Whatever you think, show confidence. Don't show fear. You are Hogwarts students." He looked pointedly at Warrington, who had not held his composure, as well as Cedric or Scott. Warrington's face went even redder. "Hey, Scott," Roger murmured. "Let Fred take Warrington down later." Scott turned. Fred, at the back, gave him a wink. Moody clapped his hands. "Right," he said. "I'll start testing your abilities. Who wants to go first? You may choose your own opponent." Scott looked at Warrington again. The Slytherin avoided his gaze and shrugged. "Let me," Fred shouted from the crowd. "I'll test Warrington's strength for everyone." "Weasley," Warrington growled. Fred strode onto the stage before anyone could stop him. "If you lose to me, give me your spot," he announced, casual as if he were asking for a butterbeer. "We don't have a rule like that, Mr. Weasley," McGonagall said sharply. "Oh, rules are sometimes meant to be tested," Fred replied, lounging and looking every inch the slacker, though his eyes fixed on Warrington were serious. "If I lose, I'll apologize to you in front of everyone and admit I was wrong. Sound fair, Warrington?" Warrington snarled, conflicted. Agreeing could cost him his place. Refusing would look like cowardice. His pride won out. "I'll make you apologize," he said. "Weasley," McGonagall bristled. "Dueling as training is fine," she said, "but spots for the tournament are not decided like that." Fred popped a mock bow. "I know, Professor. If someone took a place this way, it would be unfair to those who were recommended properly. Others would try to emulate it." He leaned on his wand and, switching tack, added, "But you do need ability to hold a spot. If you can't keep it, you shouldn't represent us." McGonagall hesitated. That would be chaotic. Moody and Flitwick looked at Fred with interest. "No criterion alone picks the best student," Moody said, "but we must pick the best." "Dueling isn't the only measure," McGonagall said, murmuring. "It's the Tri-Wizard tournament," Moody countered softly. They argued in low tones. Around them, students whispered. Roger piped up, "Is Fred worried Angelina will be snatched away? Maybe he's confident in her." Scott said, thinking of Angelina's proficiency in dueling and defense against the dark arts. She was not weak, but she could be beaten, depending on the opponent. Fred raised his hand again. What I mean is this: a spot can only be taken with the other person's consent. If they refuse, they keep it. That's a right for those recommended. He pointed at Warrington. Warrington agreed, didn't he? That claim brought boos for most of the assembled students. Shameless, Roger muttered. Scott added dryly, he's willing to sell out his own brother for Angelina. He'd seen George's startled look a moment before. Warrington, now beside himself, aimed his wand at Fred. I agreed to fight you, but don't think you've already won. I'll make you apologize in public. Fred merely shrugged. Can we start, Professor? Our wager's on. Moody struck his cane decisively. Very well. McGonagall opened her mouth as if to protest further. Then, seeing the will in Moody's eye, said nothing and stepped down from the stage. Begin, she warned. Moody raised his hand. 3, 2, 1, duel! As Professor Moody began his countdown, Fred surprised everyone on the dueling stage by drawing a thick glove from his pocket and sliding it onto his left hand. The moment Moody's hand came down, Warrington sprang into action. Diffindo. A red beam shot straight for Fred's face. Fred didn't flick his wand to block or even try to dodge. He met Warrington's gaze and held up his gloved left palm. Warrington's smile grew triumphant. The cutting charm struck Fred's glove with a dull thud. The glove flashed white, and the red beam reversed and slammed into Warrington's chest. He flew backward with a spray of torn cloth and blood, crashing off the stage to the floor below. Looks like I won. Fred withdrew his hand, stuck it on his hip, and said a little proudly. The room erupted. Cheater! Professor! Weasley's cheating! Warrington, clutching his now bleeding chest, staggered to his feet as Professor Flitwick rushed over with healing charms. This isn't a fair duel. He used a magical item. Fred tilted his head, feigning innocence. You mean this? He shook his gloved hand. Roger nudged Scott and muttered, That was brilliant. Scott watched, amused. Fred turned to Professor Moody. Professor, this is my own invention, the anti-charm glove. It should count as part of my skill, right? Warrington protested. You're lying. How do we know you didn't get it from somewhere else? Moody ignored the protests and fixed his gaze on the glove with genuine curiosity. You made this yourself? Does it deflect jinxes like a shield charm? Fred seized the opportunity. Exactly. George and I made it together. He nodded eagerly. It can replace a shield charm. Moody studied him. Any flaws? Fred shrugged. Well, very powerful jinxes won't be deflected. Moody kept looking at him. Fred pouted and added, and only works if you stare into your opponent's eyes when you use it. A useful invention, Mr. Weasley, Moody said with an approving look. I can see Aurors ordering these from the Ministry. He shook his head. Some of the newer Aurors can't even cast a shield charm. Fred nearly glowed. Minister Bones said Aurors will be taking action against Death Eaters soon, so they'll need our products. Besides the anti-charm glove, we also have anti-charm hats. Very handy. Ahem. Professor McGonagall's interruption was sharp. This is not your product launch, Mr. Weasley. All right, I'll stop. Fred raised his hands in mock surrender. Moody interjected. We'll talk about your invention later. For now, you will have another match with Mr. Warrington. Warrington, restored by Flitwick's charms and with his robes mended, marched back onto the stage and pointed his wand at Fred. Take off that damned glove, Weasley. Let's fight properly. Otherwise, I won't be convinced. Fred looked at Warrington, glanced around at the others, and grinned. Very well. I'll show you plainly. If I'm going to Beauxbatons in your place, I'll do it honestly. He slipped the glove off and tucked it into his pocket. Roger laughed. Again? I suppose since it's his invention, it counts as part of his strength. Scott smiled. He doesn't just want to convince Warrington, he wants to leave everyone speechless. So that's it, Roger said, amused. Love makes the usually slick Fred act odd. The duel resumed. This time, Fred used no tricks. He and Warrington matched charm for charm, but Fred's spells were more fluid, his footwork quicker. Victory was clear and clean. Thank you, Mr. Warrington, Fred said with a grand bow. I will go to Beauxbatons in your stead and fight for Hogwarts' honor. The words stung Warrington, but there was nothing he could say. He swallowed hard and stalked off the stage in humiliation. A smattering of applause rose in the classroom, but Fred hardly noticed. He was shamelessly winking at Angelina until Moody briskly led him off the stage. Dueling practice continued. As expected, a few students tried to challenge those already qualified for the Tri-Wizard contests, hoping for a last-minute spot, but most refused. George, who had been blindsided by Fred's stunt, was not pleased. The twins, normally inseparable, had a rare spat. Scott, untouchable in reputation, stood nearby with the two of them watching closely. "I can't believe you changed plans at the last minute and didn't even tell your brother," George grumbled. Fred forced an apologetic smile. "I had no choice. If I hadn't, some of the people who already had spots might have been knocked out, and they'd hate me for it." George scoffed. "Since when did you start worrying about people hating you?" "I did it for Angelina." Fred looped an arm around George's shoulders and leaned in theatrically. "You know, if I hadn't added conditions, Professor McGonagall wouldn't have taken me seriously." George immediately put on a melodramatic expression and pretended to wipe away a tear. "To you, is Angelina more important than me?" Fred blinked, then played along. "What are you talking about? You too." "They're both your wings," Scott supplied dryly. Fred brightened. "Yes, you're both my wings." George couldn't keep a straight face and burst out laughing. "That's disgusting." He made a face, then softened. "Fine, who told you you're Fred? Since you're in love, I'll support you, but if you don't win Angelina, I won't forgive you." Fred clapped him on the shoulder. "I knew I could count on you." "Who told you you're George?" George rolled his eyes. "I didn't have plans to go anyway." Scott piped up, amused. "The Tri-Wizard lasts more than half a year. Will this be the longest you two are ever apart?" Fred and George exchanged startled looks. "That long?" "That's right," Scott nodded. "Usually it's 3 tasks, first in November, second in February, and the final in June." "Oh." Fred looked a little stunned. "Maybe I can come back right after the Yule Ball." "Do you think you decide that?" George snapped. Scott chuckled. "You're growing up. You'll have to get used to being apart. Time to grow up, baby Fred, baby George." "No way, we're not planning on being separated," Fred said. George agreed. Then Scott, cornered, muttered, "All right, I spoke too much." Nearby, the duel between Roger and Caccini drew attention. Among the 25 students already assured places, most had learned from Warrington's mishap and wouldn't accept further challenges. They were quietly choosing opponents from among themselves instead. Scott was fascinated by Roger's match. "Roger, he's dueling his ex?" Fred was delighted. "This'll be juicy." George grinned. "Why would he pick that?" "Caccini chose him," Scott said with a streak of schadenfreude. On stage, Roger looked uneasy. "I don't want to fight you, Caccini. Stop whining." Caccini, hair cropped short, snapped. "If you duel me properly, what happened before is over." "All right." Roger didn't like it, but he drew his wand. "Promise you'll take it seriously." "If you don't, you'll regret it," she said. Eddie and Milton drifted closer to watch, grinning. Caccini had once been more interested in literature and music than dueling, but with a push from the Book of Prometheus, both she and Milton had reclaimed their magical strengths. Still, without sufficient academic points, her turnaround was late and short-lived. She began evenly enough, but Roger quickly took control and won. The watching group breathed a collective sigh of regret at the missed spectacle. Roger, puzzled by their disappointed expressions, wandered off stage. Professor Moody called out, "Who wants to come up next?" "Me," said Cedric Diggory, stepping forward. He hadn't yet taken the stage all afternoon. Moody nodded. "Mr. Diggory, who is your opponent?" Cedric scanned the room. "Scott," he called. "I'd like to face Scott." Scott waved. "You want me?" "I do," Cedric said. "Even if I don't expect to win, I want to measure myself against you." Scott shrugged and walked up. The crowd made a path as the two took their places. Cedric gave a grateful smile. "Thank you," Scott smiled back. "You're too polite, Cedric. I thought we were friends." "We are," Cedric said happily. "Then be casual." "Ready," Moody barked. Scott and Cedric retreated to the edges of the stage. 3, 2, 1, duel! "Pertigo," they said in unison, and 2 shimmering shields formed in front of them. Scott's charm cracked into place the fraction of a second faster, but he didn't seize the advantage. Through the 2 invisible barriers, he studied Cedric. "You still want to duel me with Transfiguration, don't you?" Cedric nodded. "Thanks, Scott." "Very well." Scott lowered his shield. "How about this? We don't attack. We only use Transfiguration to determine the winner." "I agree." Cedric dropped his barrier too. This should be interesting. Scott smiled and pulled from his pocket a small piece of ebony, which he tossed at his feet. Cedric produced a sliver of scutellaria wood, the same material as his wand. They raised their wands together, murmured their transfiguration incantations, and waved. 458. Hogwarts is about to depart. The small ebony block beneath Scott's feet lengthened rapidly under the glow of transfiguration. In moments it had become a fish more than 2 meters long. Its body was elongated and laterally compressed, covered in fine scales with grayish-white circular spots on a brownish-green background. Its upper jaw jutted out like a long, sharp sword. The first dorsal fin rose higher than its body, like a spread sail or a fluttering flag. A sailfish, one of the fastest predators in the ocean, had appeared. At the same time, Cedric's wooden block had become a large, fierce-looking hound that stood before him. "A fish?" Cedric said in surprise. There was no water here. Compared to the usual threatening posture of a hunting animal, the sailfish's thrashing on the ground looked strangely impotent. Scott only smiled at his opponent's surprise. "That's right, this is my latest design." Blue light traced across the greenish scales, forming intricate runes, and the sound of rushing water filled the room. Transparent water surged from nowhere and formed a huge spherical bubble that floated upward, enveloping the sailfish. Inside that sphere, the great fish swam freely, and the whole orb moved in time with its motions. Cedric stared, momentarily forgetting to command his hound. Everyone in the classroom went quiet, eyes fixed on the enormous water globe and the fish swimming within it. After a long pause, Cedric let out a short laugh laced with frustration. "You've gone far beyond me," he admitted. "I don't even know how you did it. Everyone knows transfiguration alone can't make genuine magical creatures, and yet you've broken that rule." Scott gave him a small prompt. "Do you remember Bill Weasley's paper we talked about in the Transfiguration Club?" Cedric's face lit with recognition. "The one in today's Transfiguration 2 years ago, a conjecture. Perhaps we can make Transfiguration more complex." He shook his head in disbelief. "Back then, we all said it was theoretical. Practical implementation seemed nearly impossible." "You made it possible," he said. "You turned theory into reality." Scott nodded. "It's transfiguration combined with rune circuits." By then, the rest of the students had recovered and were buzzing with excited whispers. Everyone understood how difficult it would be to incorporate rune magic into transfiguration. Even seeing it with their own eyes left many incredulous. Several students turned to Professor McGonagall for confirmation. "It's true," she acknowledged. "Trollope has exceptional talent in transfiguration." Cedric gave Scott a wry smile. "Seems there's no need for a contest between us." Scott glanced at the sailfish as it flicked its tail and said, "Its combat potential hasn't really been tested. If you don't mind helping, I'd like to see how it performs against yours." "You mean?" Cedric's interest was clearly piqued. He produced more wooden blocks and transfigured them into identical hounds. "Very well. Let's see." With a flick of his wand, 8 black hounds moved as one, advancing and retreating with synchronized precision. Scott nodded in appreciation. "You've improved too, Cedric." "Not nearly as much as you," Cedric said, regaining his composure, "but I haven't been idle." The hounds trotted like wind, quickly encircling the floating water sphere. They crouched low, teeth bared, growling softly as they probed and observed, rather than charging blindly. The sailfish inside no longer swam leisurely. It stopped, leveled its sword-like upper jaw at one hound, flicked its tail, and in a blur lunged to the edge of the water bubble. Its pointed jaw pierced straight through the wooden hound. 2 nearby hounds sprang forward, but the sailfish had already released the pierced animal and slipped back toward the center. The pierced hound immediately reverted to shattered wood and fell onto the dueling stage. A thin ribbon of water extended from the sphere and executed a perfect 360-degree sweep. The jet cut through the remaining hounds like a razor, splitting them in two. Wood chips flew across the stage as the hounds became scattered blocks. Simultaneously, cracks formed across the sailfish's body, and it too quickly shattered back into splinters. Water fountained, and the condensed globe dispersed into streams that floated upward like transparent ribbons, before drifting out the window and into the black lake beyond. "It can't take the stress of being forced to burst," Scott said, frowning. I need to experiment with more suitable core materials. Cedric looked at the shredded wood on the stage and, smiling helplessly, asked, "You're merciless, Scott. Aren't you worried I won't be able to take a hit like that?" Scott asked bluntly, "Will you?" "A little," Cedric admitted. "It's disheartening, but I'm also excited. I've seen something higher to reach for." "That's the Cedric I know," Scott laughed. "Should I take that as a compliment?" Cedric asked. "No need to thank me." Scott gathered the scattered wood chips with a vanishing spell. Professor Moody applauded from the side. "Impressive, Mr. Trollope. Mr. Diggory's performance was excellent, too. I hope you both consider joining the ministry, or our training would suit you." "Thank you, Professor," both boys said, bowing before stepping down from the platform. As Scott made his way back through the crowd, many students watched him with a new admiration. He paid it little mind and returned to his friends. "Always full of surprises," Eddie said, eyeing him. "Oh, so you're a show-off now?" Eddie teased. Roger chimed in. "Have you finally realized? This one either keeps quiet or goes all out." Fred and George clapped their hands on Scott's shoulders from either side. "As Ravenclaws, we can't let Gryffindor have all the drama," Fred announced. "You actually aim to be the Gryffindor head's favorite?" George teased. "We, brave Gryffindors, vow to protect our honor." Scott looked from one to the other and groaned. "Are you trying to become my wings?" "Never," the twins replied in mock solemnity and released him. Milton, more sincere, put a hand on Scott's shoulder. "If you represent Hogwarts, you'll win the Tri-Wizard tournament." Scott felt warmed by the genuine support. Not everyone here was irreverent, after all. "Thanks. I'll do my best," he said. Milton nodded. "I believe you can." The day's practical training stretched from morning to evening. Later, Professor Moody and Professor Flitwick took turns coaching the representatives on the dueling stage. Professor McGonagall also used the time to ensure the students wouldn't embarrass themselves at the Yule Ball and began holding dance classes. Fred was frequently chosen as McGonagall's demonstration partner, a role he endured with a pained expression that kept the rest of the class in stitches. Angelina laughed the loudest. October flew by. The 25 students selected to represent Hogwarts were due to depart for Beauxbatons in France on October 31st. The night before they left, Scott and a group of Ravenclaws gathered in the common room. Nearly every Ravenclaw stopped by to wish them luck. "It'd be best if one of you became champion," they said. Most believed the strongest candidates were 7th-year prefect Ethan Cooper and 6th-year Scott. Ravenclaws considered Ethan the best among the 17-year-olds and Scott the strongest overall. Many placed a lot of faith in him, regardless of the age note in the rules. "I'm getting nervous," Ethan whispered to Scott. "I don't think I'm stronger than Cedric Diggory of Hufflepuff. He's older, isn't he?" Nervousness had made him unusually talkative. Honestly, none of the houses seemed to have an outstanding candidate this year. "Relax, Ethan," Scott advised. "Don't overthink it. If you're chosen, fight to win. If you're not, cheer on whoever is." Ethan flopped onto the sofa like a deflated banner. "Right, I'll do that." He waved one hand. "Anyway, for now, the job of upholding Ravenclaw's honor is on you, Scott." "Hey," Scott protested. Ethan's mood could change too fast. Roger interjected. "I just realized that in February Hogwarts will start apparition classes, but we'll be at Beauxbatons then. I don't want to miss that." "Don't worry," Scott replied. "The professors will find a way for us to learn apparition. If we can't get an apparition license from the ministry, we won't be able to use it legally," Roger fretted. "They'll consider it," Ethan reassured him. Across the room, Scott saw Luna by a distant window, waving. He went over to her, and she pulled him down to a nearby table and reached into her knitted shoulder bag. She produced odd trinkets that Scott recognized from her father's workshop. A headdress fitted with 2 small golden hearing aid-like devices, a headband with 2 tiny blue wing ornaments, and an orange-red fruit that looked like a radish. "This is a Sorao Meng Sifun," Luna explained, pointing to the headdress. "It filters out disturbances for deep thinkers. This," she said about the winged headband, "is a Lumina Enhancer. It helps induce a higher state of thought. And this," she held up the orange-red thing, "is a dirigible plum. It improves the ability to accept unusual ideas." She set all 3 into Scott's hands. "My dad sent them. I think they might help." Scott looked at the odd little inventions and then at Luna. Thank you, he said. I know you don't exactly believe in them. Luna's voice drifted, but take them. They might come in handy. They took up little space, so Scott tucked them into his lizard skin satchel. Thanks. I'll try them. Luna smiled. You'll be the champion, Scott. I hope so, he replied. The next morning after breakfast, everyone gathered on the wide lawn outside the castle. Dumbledore stood with the 25 student delegates on one side, while Professor McGonagall and the other professors brought the rest of the school to see them off. Time is almost up, Dumbledore said, drawing the Elder Wand. We're about to depart. Scott watched Dumbledore's movements with keen curiosity. He still didn't know what form their transportation would take, and he'd been looking forward to it for weeks. The spire separates. As Dumbledore waved his wand, a low rumble echoed through the great hall. Everyone looked up, surprised at the roof. At Dumbledore's command, the rocket-shaped spire in the center of the hall began to turn. He, too, watched it with a trace of concern, muttering, "Even as headmaster of Hogwarts, I have yet to master all the secrets of this castle. It has not been used in centuries." Only Scott and a few others nearby caught some of the words. He watched as the tower slowly detached from the roof and floated free. A transportation device, then, Scott thought, remembering the original story. When Voldemort's forces besieged Hogwarts, students escaped only through secret passages to Hogsmeade. This spire must be one of the castle's hidden means of travel. Maybe, Scott considered, the Ravenclaw mentor had told Dumbledore about it. Perhaps this was another butterfly effect. His presence had altered events. Because of him, Peeves had wandered into a secluded underground music room and been trapped by Medea's ancient contraption. Medea's consciousness had been stirred. Her magic vow affected many students. Helena had gone to confront her and unwittingly awakened Ravenclaw's portrait. Now that the portrait existed again, the professors might learn more of the castle's secrets, and Hogwarts could become harder to conquer. While Scott thought, the spire hovered above them, casting a huge shadow. Everyone stared in wonder. "So we're actually going to ride this rocket to Beauxbaton?" Roger asked Scott. "Cool," Fred whooped, waving excitedly back toward George in the crowd. The spire touched down on the lawn. Up close, it was tall but narrow. By outward looks, it couldn't contain more than a few people, but that didn't worry anyone. "Next, we activate it," Dumbledore said. He raised his wand again and spoke a crisp incantation. The stone around the spire retreated, and two great doors formed, red wood inlaid with metals that made the Hogwarts crest. Stone steps rolled up beneath them. Dumbledore flicked his wand, and with a soft creak, two winged boar statues that normally guarded the castle entrance soared over and perched on pillars by the spire's doorway. Mechanical clicks came from inside. The boar's eyes glowed and faint mist puffed from their nostrils. The doors opened, and a red carpet unrolled down the steps. "Let us depart." Dumbledore led the way. Students cheered from the lawn. "Go, go, go! Win the championship! Long live Hogwarts!" And they stepped onto the carpet and inside. Fred made a face. "Too bad Warrington didn't show. I wanted to thank him properly before leaving." Scott smirked inwardly. He was sure Fred would have tried to infuriate him to death. Inside the tower, however, the interior was far more spacious than the narrow exterior suggested. The hall looked like a smaller version of the Great Hall, one long table that could seat 30 or more, and winding staircases led up. Dumbledore closed the doors behind them with a wave, and everyone's cheers were cut off. "Hold on tight," he warned. The spire rose smoothly into the sky. They crowded to the windows to wave. Bits of the castle and the crowd shrank below. Beyond the grounds, they saw the Forbidden Forest, the Black Lake, and Hogsmeade, until the tower slipped into thick clouds. Scott pressed his forehead to the glass and saw shapes suspended against the white. "Thestrals," he said. Fred squeezed next to him. "You can see them?" "I can," Fred answered. "I saw death when my grandfather died." "So the spire needs Thestrals to pull it?" Roger sounded disappointed. Scott grinned. "It floats, it's light inside, and the Thestrals pull. Pretty clever." As he spoke, ropes shot from the spire and clipped to harnesses on the winged creatures. The Thestrals rose and the spire surged forward. Dumbledore walked to the window. "We are using a magic-conserving travel mode," he explained cheerily. "If we were not mindful of expending the castle's power, we could have sent you here instantly using Hogwarts magic." The spire can apparate everyone? Fred asked, eyes wide. Dumbledore shook his head. Not apparition, though the effect is similar, but it would require us to lock on to Beauxbaton's magical signature first, which would cost a great deal of the castle's protective magic. Scott guessed the consequence. That would weaken Hogwarts' defenses. Exactly. Dumbledore looked serious. We must ensure the castle's enchantments remain strong. For the next 6 months, you will all live here. He gestured toward the staircases. Each room holds 4. There are house elves to serve you. Lunch will be in the Great Hall at noon. We should arrive at Beauxbaton's this afternoon and dine with them there. They climbed up. The spire had several floors. A second-floor common room decorated in house colors with sofas and tables, and dormitories above, connected by a central spiral staircase. Bathrooms and washrooms were provided. The 20-plus of them could spread comfortably through the rooms. Scott, Roger, and Fred shared a chamber. After stowing their trunks, they convened in the second-floor common room. Dumbledore had not yet appeared. There are so many rooms, we don't need 4 to a room, Roger said with a chuckle. He jabbed Fred. Invite Angelina. 2 to a room, that'll do. Angelina and other girls nearby tittered. Angelina laughed. If Fred dares to ask me, I'll crack your head with a beater's bat, she vowed. I'm not Roger, Fred protested. Hey, what if I invite you to be my partner for the Yule Ball? Angelina smiled. Accepted. Cheers erupted. Someone pointed out slyly that the ball was still 2 months away. Fred preened. The boys and girls began to stare and size each other up like a flock of matchmaking pink bubbles. Roger broke the mood, reminding them all that Beauxbatons and Durmstrang would also be at the ball, plenty of new prospects abroad. The conversation dissolved into teasing and laughter, and the high-altitude silence of the journey settled over them. By sunset, Dumbledore's voice called from below. Students, don your school robes. We are about to land. They straightened ties, smoothed robes, and gathered. Dumbledore's outfit was theatrical. A tall, pointed hat and star-studded robes, his beard brushed and tied at the end with a neat pink ribbon. Fred whispered to Scott, We lose in the dressing contest to a 100-year-old man. If that's his style, I'll support him, Scott murmured. The spire descended through the clouds, and the sight of Beauxbaton's unfurled below. The estate lay among rolling lawns and mountains, the Pyrenees glowing in the sunset. The girls whispered in delight. The castle's architecture was elegant, palace-like, more French chateau than rugged fortress. They landed on a lawn where Beauxbaton's students and staff waited. Most wore flowing light blue robes. At the front stood a strikingly tall witch, almost as large as Hagrid, Madame Olympe Maxime. Up close, she was far more delicate than Hagrid, olive-skinned, dark luminous eyes, a slender nose, hair smoothed into a bun, and opulent opal jewelry. A black satin robe shimmered on her, an imposing presence to match Dumbledore's greeting. Oh, Dumbledore, welcome, welcome to you all, she trilled, taking his hand. He performed a ceremonious hand kiss. Dear Maxime, long time, Dumbledore said with a bow. Does Durmstrang arrive with the rest? Not yet, she began, then turned as Scott heard a shout. Hey, Scott! Lucio, whom Scott had met in Spain over the summer, broke from the Beauxbatons crowd and ran straight to him, ignoring the disapproving looks of professors behind him. Hello, Lucio, Scott said, introducing him to Roger and Fred. Lucio's eyes were fixed on the spire. It must be an alchemical construct. How else could it move? Amazing. May I see it inside? You'll need permission from Professor Dumbledore, Scott said. Please ask him for me, Lucio begged. He was oblivious to the attention his eagerness drew. Scott smiled and pointed to the lake. Durmstrang has arrived. Their heads turned as water in the distant lake churned. A whirlpool opened. Dark timber rose. Then a massive wooden ship broke the surface. An eerie, skeletal vessel, like something salvaged from a wreck. Lanterns glowed dimly through portholes as it approached. An anchor thudded, a gangplank landed, and figures in shaggy fur cloaks stepped onto the lawn. The leader was a truly burly wizard, Professor Hartman, apparently replacing Karkaroff, who had fled after Voldemort's return. Professor Maxime, Professor Dumbledore, Hartman rumbled. The 3 heads exchanged formalities. Madame Maxime checked the thestrals, then led the guests into her palace castle. Victor Krum, Durmstrang's famous Quidditch star, drew crowds. Fred nudged Scott, whispering about autograph money. Scott and Roger exchanged a look. Fred's interest was predictable. They passed a gleaming white square with a fountain in the middle, two statues in its center. Lucio explained with pride, "That's the fountain named for Nicholas Flamel and his wife. The water is said to restore and beautify. Flamel and Perenelle once helped fund the school." Inside the great hall, a banquet chamber unlike Hogwarts, they all stopped to stare. It was decorated in sparkling opulence, glittering crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and dozens of fairies weaving through the lights. Lucio grinned. Madame Maxime goes all out. The Beauxbatons students clustered around them. The heads of house system didn't exist here. "We don't have houses," Lucio explained as they sat. "We have large year groups for the first 2 years. Then from the 3rd year, students pick professors to study under, more like apprenticeships with more choice." Madame Maxime rose from an ornate high-backed chair. At once the whole hall went silent. Every student sat straighter. She raised a crystal goblet the size of a small bowl and addressed them in a low voice. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and especially our honored guests. On behalf of Beauxbatons, I welcome your arrival and am certain we shall provide you a memorable stay. It is our honor to host the revived Triwizard Tournament here at our palace. Please, enjoy the dinner we have prepared." Platters tumbled onto the tables, French dishes galore, with several British dishes for the guests. Scott and his friends ignored the familiar domestic fare and dove into unfamiliar flavors. Partway through, a girl with long silver hair glided across the hall. The moment she stepped into view, she outshone even the chandeliers. Her hair fell like moonlight to her waist. Her eyes were deep blue, her features perfect, pure, arresting beauty. She was Fleur Delacour. Boys' heads turned. Even the fairies seemed to pause. "Lucio," she said with a small note of annoyance, "you always do as you please. Are you trying to anger Madame Maxime?" Lucio merely shrugged. Scott nudged Fred with his foot. "What are you staring at?" "That's your sister-in-law." Fred snapped back to earth and glanced at Angelina, who had already seen his earlier gawping and rolled her eyes. Fleur spoke in a cool, haughty way, looking at Lucio as if she hardly saw anyone else. When she turned to leave, the air seemed to follow her. "That's Fleur Delacour, 7th year. Madame Maxime's favorite," Lucio said. "Don't take her to heart." Roger watched the retreating figure, half-entranced. "I should have worked so hard to come here," he sighed. Lucio shook his head. "Don't be rash. Lots of boys like Fleur, plenty of excellent ones. She's used to being adored. She rarely accepts a straightforward pursuit." Nearby Beauxbaton students nodded in agreement and teased Roger. He only smiled. "Then just watch me," he said confidently. Scott watched him and said nothing. In the original timeline of the tournament, Roger had been Fleur's dance partner and had failed to win her. He resolved to wait and see whether Roger would make the same mistakes. Inside Beauxbaton's opulently luxurious great hall, after everyone had eaten their fill, Madame Maxime rose from the high table. As if on cue, the once bustling hall fell completely silent. Scott and the others stayed quiet as well, following the unspoken rule that guests wait for the host to speak. Almost at the same moment, Madame Maxime stood. The plates and leftovers vanished from the tables and were replaced by bright, colorful irises. The fresh scent of flowers chased away the lingering smells of the meal. "I believe what you are most eager for is not my speech, but the Triwizard Tournament itself," Madame Maxime said with a smile. If this had been Dumbledore at Hogwarts, the students might already have been cheering. Here, however, the Beauxbaton students and teachers listened in attentive silence. The 25 Hogwarts students visiting, Scott among them, kept quiet too. "First, I would like to thank and introduce 2 gentlemen," Madame Maxime continued, gesturing. "Mr. Lefebvre, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, French Ministry of Magic." A middle-aged man in a neat suit rose and bowed slightly. His brown hair was slicked back to a fault, and a pair of small, curled mustaches made him look every inch the bureaucratic elite. "Mr. Jolly, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, French Ministry of Magic." The younger, more casual-looking Mr. Jolly also stood and waved. He had close-cropped hair, a strong build, and an energetic smile. Without the leadership and assistance of Mr. Lefebvre and Mr. Jolly, the preparations for Beauxbaton's hosting of the Triwizard Tournament would not have been possible, Madame Maxime went on. Led by her, polite, if restrained, applause rippled through the hall. The two officials then returned to their seats. During the competition, they will sit on the judging panel with me, Professor Dumbledore, and Professor Hartman to score the champions' performances, Madame Maxime said. The word champions drew every student's attention. The tasks for the champions have been exhaustively reviewed. Our preparations are complete. She enumerated the purpose and nature of the tests. 3 tasks across the school year to test magical ability, courage, reasoning, and the capacity to overcome danger. Then she drew her wand. We will select 3 champions to represent their schools, she said. The judging panel will score each champion's performance in every round. The champion with the highest total score will win. She tapped her wand lightly. Now, let us summon the Goblet of Fire, which will select our champions. A crack ran through the marble floor directly in front of her. A square of the floor opened and rose, a pure white stone platform about 2 meters on a side and half a meter high, with steps on the left, right, and front. In the platform's center sat a jeweled wooden box, and atop it a rough-looking wooden goblet that burned with flickering blue-white flames. Any student who wishes to compete must write his name and school on a piece of parchment and toss it into the goblet, Madame Maxime said. You may register within 24 hours. Tomorrow night, the Goblet of Fire will choose, on its own, the 3 students it deems most worthy to represent the 3 schools. She added a caveat. Of course, champions must be at least 17 years old. Madame Maxime pointed out that an insurmountable barrier had been set between underage students and the Goblet of Fire. Her voice swelled with pride. The stone platform is an alchemical creation designed by several Beauxbatons alchemists. Its purpose is to prevent underage wizards from ascending the steps. Scott studied the white platform, already thinking about ways to bypass it. Thinking of ways to break through? Lucio murmured, almost inaudible. I helped create the platform. I won't help you cheat, though. Scott turned, surprised. Lucio smiled and added, I won't put my name in either. I'm only an alchemist. I can't guarantee my combat effectiveness. Scott nodded. Madame Maxime continued, her tone solemn, reminding anyone considering registration that putting their name in the cup forms a magical contract. Once chosen, a champion must see the competition through to the end. No backing out. Think carefully, she said. That concludes the explanations about the Triwizard Tournament. Good night. When the formalities were over, conversation resumed. Fred put an arm around Lucio's shoulder. So you helped with the platform? He teased. Lucio refused to say more. Fred offered to sneak him into the flying tower as compensation, but Lucio declined, fearing expulsion. Dumbledore came over and suggested the students return to the tower to sleep. I want to study how to put my name into the cup, Professor, Fred protested. Scott, too. Dumbledore smiled. Oh, you two aren't old enough, are you? But it seems you haven't given up. Scott explained, Madame Maxime said the barrier is intended to be insurmountable for underage students, but she phrased it carefully. She said it's difficult to break through, not impossible. She said it prevents underage wizards from ascending the steps, not that it forbids them. And if there weren't some way for exceptions, why allow a full 24 hours for registration? Madame Maxime herself overheard this and approached. She looked Scott over, amused. It seems your student has already understood the unspoken rules for choosing champions, Dumbledore. Dumbledore chuckled. Madame Maxime told Scott, Clever boy, we believe that if a student can break through that barrier on his own within the 24 hours, even if he is underage, he qualifies to become a champion. She called Lucio to her side and left. Dumbledore went back to the tower, not stopping anyone who wanted to examine the platform. The Hogwarts students, joined by a few Slytherins, went as a group to the stone platform and stared at the blue-white flames. The Durmstrang delegation had gone back to their ship, and the Beauxbatons students watched the Hogwarts group with curiosity. Many had heard Scott's remark and wanted to see whether anyone could beat the barrier. Are you starting now? A boy asked. I thought you'd wait until tomorrow. We want to try, Scott said politely. Let Cedric go up first. Let's see what registration looks like under normal circumstances. Cedric stepped forward willingly. He found a piece of paper and a pen, wrote his name and school, and walked up the steps. I don't feel anything, he said as he ascended. He reached the platform and tossed the parchment into the goblet. For a moment, the blue-white flames turned red and spat sparks. "Looks like I did it," Cedric said, pleased, then descended. "Your turn," Cedric asked Scott. Scott stepped forward and laid his hand on the white stone, extending his magical perception. The platform felt complex. "This is an alchemical work," he muttered. Others agreed to give him time. Angelina and the other 17-year-olds climbed and registered. Scott kept probing the platform, trying to understand its wards. "Is there a way around it?" Fred whispered eagerly. Scott only smiled. "Try, Fred," he said. "I want to see how it stops you." Fred, flattered and game, wrote his slip. He'd barely put his foot on the first step when he noticed no obstruction. He lifted his other foot and felt nothing. Then, as he tried to step further, it was as if invisible hands pressed heavily on his shoulders, refusing him higher ascent. He could retreat easily, though. To test a loophole, he crumpled his slip and tossed it toward the goblet. The paper flew, then dropped straight down as if on a string. "There's no easy loophole," Roger observed. Scott pulled a small enchanted mirror from his lizard skin bag and handed it to Fred. George's face filled the glass, with the rest of the Weasleys behind him. "Hi, how's Beauxbatons?" George demanded. The Hogwarts contingent laughed and waved the mirror around to show where they were. Questions flew both ways. How had they all grouped together? What was Scott doing? And talk went on lively into the night. After the call, Scott returned to the dormitory and began reconstructing the ancient runic circuit from the stone platform. Roger watched for a while, but was baffled by the rune's density. Fred could help only with general structure. "There are so many uncommon runes," he fretted. "Most of our devices don't use these." "There's no need to decipher every one," Scott said. "Many are probably just meant to confuse." "Even if we decode them, there may be no countermeasure," Fred added. "Maybe I should try an aging potion. One drop might do it." "You can try," Scott said. "Even a failed attempt would be useful data, but perhaps we should change our approach." Early the next morning, Scott and Fred slipped out before Roger and hurried to the Great Hall. The platform was already crowded. Students watched as a silver-haired figure, Fleur Delacour, climbed the steps and signed. The Beauxbatons students cheered loudly in Madame Maxime's absence. Several more Beauxbatons students registered successfully. A few underage students tried and failed. Scott approached with Fred and Lucio at his heels. "You're the one Lucio told us about?" Fleur asked, more curious than hostile when Scott nodded. She paused on the platform to watch him. Scott stood at the first step and fell into a strange, deliberate stillness. Around him, people murmured and wondered if he was putting on a show. In a channel only he could perceive, he drew in and quieted the magical fluctuations around his body. It was a discipline of magic perception. He learned to make his magic almost dormant. When his aura was entirely calm, he lifted his foot. "He moved," someone cried. Scott stepped onto the first step with no reaction from the stone, then tried for the second. At once he felt the resistance, that same sensation of hands pressing on his shoulders. He tried again and again, sweat beading on his forehead, but his body would not move further. He gave up and stepped down. The crowd buzzed. Lucio grinned. "It's not just detecting magic," he said. "It tests the body too. It measures your age in every way." Scott thought for a moment and then turned to Cedric. "I need your help." Cedric didn't hesitate. "No problem," he said. Scott pressed his wand to Cedric's chest. He closed his eyes and began a human transfiguration, but not one that changed outward appearance. He matched his own magical signature to Cedric's, making his own magic fluctuations mirror Cedric's exactly. At the same time, he worked a subtle transfigurative charm on himself to alter his bone age in the perception of the platform, altering the inner markers the platform measured without changing his visible features. When he finished, Scott stepped up. With the platform fooled by both the matching magical signature and the shifted bone age, he crossed the steps and reached the top. He pulled the parchment with his name and Hogwarts' name from his pocket and tossed it into the goblet. The flames flashed red with sparks. "He did it!" The crowd erupted. Students from every school cheered. Scott bowed, then descended the platform steadily. "Congratulations," Cedric said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Thank you," Scott replied, sincere. Lucio rushed over, breathless with excitement. "How did you do it?" he demanded, eyes wide. Scott explained simply, human transfiguration. I matched my magic to Cedric's and adjusted my bone age to his. The stone platform measures both magical and bodily age. Lucio stared in astonishment. You can do that? I knew you were good at transfiguration, but this? Fred and Roger came running up. Quick, Scott, do mine too. Fred begged. A dozen underage students hovered, eager. Scott shook his head. Changing bone age alone isn't enough. You have to change your magic as well. I could do that, but the platform won't allow two people to go up together. It forbids two people, Lucio confirmed. Fred grinned sheepishly. Well, there goes my chance at that 1,000-galleon prize. It's fine, Roger said with a shrug. They had only been joking anyway. Fred handed the enchanted mirror back to Scott so he could receive the congratulations and good wishes pouring in from Hogwarts. The excitement lingered in the Great Hall, congratulatory voices overlapping, and Scott felt the strange mixture of relief and anticipation settle in his chest.